Chapter 77. Yu Qianshou was fighting to his heart's content when he suddenly sensed something charging over. He didn't hurry to turn around and instead turned around to sweep his leg. With a pang sound, the colt was sent flying. Yu Qianshou was stunned. The foal struggled to get up from the ground and charged at Chen Feng, who was punching and kicking. "Stupid horse, you ate my ginseng and still dare to help the evildoer. F***CKU. Yu Qianshou kicked the horse again and helped Chen Feng out. "Stop!" The white fox shouted, and her figure appeared in front of them. With the white fox speaking, Yu Qianshou and Chen Feng didn't dare to make a move. The two of them cursed and stood to the side. The white fox told them to stop but didn't tell them to stop. Instead, the foal got up and ran to Guan Yu, who was sitting on the ground with his hands on his head. It bit on his green robe and gently pulled. "Hey! This stupid horse can really take a beating. A normal adult horse wouldn't be able to take 2 kicks from me. Looks like I didn't eat ginseng for nothing. Ha, it's a little intelligent now. It knows how to protect its owner at such a young age," Yu Qianshou said to Chen Feng. Chen Feng replied with yes and yes. The white fox then rolled her eyes at them. The two of them chuckled and shut up. Seeing that the white fox had arrived, the badly battered Guan Yu finally felt relieved and stood up. He stroked the 3 strands of his long beard that had been messed up and patted the footprints on his green robe. He looked at the 2 assailants resentfully and knew that he was in the wrong first. Without saying anything else, he muttered, "Boss, it's fine if you hit me, but why didn't you let go of such a small horse?" Ha! This man and horse were really interesting. Yu Qianshou laughed and scolded, "Damn, is your horse more important or us Foundation establishment? You're crazy. I don't want to waste time with you. You two prepare 100 sets of spirit herbs for the Foundation establishment pill. I, your boss, will start concocting pills tomorrow." "Really?" Chen Feng said happily. Guan Yu had also forgotten about being beaten up just now. He opened his eyes wide in excitement. "Yes. I've finally found a suitable place to concoct pills. I can start now," said Yu Qianshou with a smile. He wasn't going to tell her that the previous 3-day appointment was because his skills weren't up to par. He made up a lie and said that he hadn't found a good place to concoct pills. As for the fact that he had suffered so much to learn alchemy, he was even less likely to mention it. If he did, it would really damage the prestige of his boss. Both of them nodded and went to prepare the spiritual herbs without saying anything else. The colt limped along with Guan Yu, who had just been beaten. Yu Qianshou gritted his teeth at the sight of it and scolded jokingly, "Lousy horse." The white fox's slender and fair neck gently twisted as she looked at him and said, "As far as I know, it's not easy for aura condensation cultivators to concoct panaceas. Have you really learned it? Look at what Big Sister is saying. Don't you know whose little brother I am? How could such a small matter stump me? Of course, I've really learned it," Yu Qianshou said proudly. The white fox turned around and looked at the sea of flowers. She said lightly, "The fire in the cauldron is very strong. Your cultivation is only at the late stage of aura condensation. In order to learn alchemy, your divine sense must have suffered a lot. There are quite a lot of high-grade spirit stones in that pile of spirit stones." With her cultivation level, she naturally wouldn't be able to hide the fact that something was missing in this area. Only a few people knew the pain of having their divine sense injured. Even though they had endured it, Yu Qianshou still felt a lingering fear when he thought about it. He smiled unnaturally and looked at the sea of flowers. He changed the topic and said, "Big Sister, look at the beautiful flowers in this golden pearl. The scenery is really good. I keep calling it golden pearl, golden pearl. It's really a bit hard to pronounce. Big Sister, why don't you give this place a name?" The white fox shook her head lightly. A strand of hair hanging down her forehead was tucked behind her ear. She said slowly, "I can't. Little brother is brimming with talent. You should name it." "I'm brimming with talent?" Yu Qianshou knew his own limitations. However, the feeling of being praised by a beauty was really good. His mood also became better. He opened his arms facing the sea of flowers. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath of the fragrance. He exhaled and opened his eyes. In the far west, there is a legendary ideal world called Utopia. I hope that one day, Golden Pearl can also become a legend and become an ideal world. Big sister, how about Utopia? Utopia? The white fox carefully thought about it. She frowned unconsciously. To be honest, she didn't think that there was anything nice about this name. In fact, it was a bit strange. However, she still nodded. She looked at the sea of flowers that was brimming with fragrance. She smiled and said, "Ideal world? I hope that I can live peacefully like this. This is my ideal world. Let's call it Utopia according to little brother." Yu Qianqiu smiled. He suddenly tilted his head and asked, "Big sister, do you have a name?" The white fox looked at him in surprise. When she turned back, her eyes were filled with confusion. A scene that had been buried for a long time came to her mind again. The scholar clumsily used a knife to cut a thorn hairpin. He made a few cuts on his hand. The faint red on the thorn hairpin was his blood. He used his sleeve to wipe it, but the red seemed to never be wiped off. The scholar happily held the thorn hairpin and ran over. He smiled and said, "Little Bai, look. I made this for you. Come, let me put it in for you." In fact, she saw the whole process of his clumsiness. She nodded her head shyly. She tied up her hair and let him put the thorn hairpin in her hair. The scholar looked at it carefully and smiled. "Little Bai, you look really good. Little Bai, let me give you a name." She looked at him happily and nodded her head. The scholar looked at the hairpin and thought for a while. He said, "Since you are called Little Bai, I will name you White Jingmyang. What do you think? Do you like it?" She nodded her head and said, "I like it." The scholar smiled with satisfaction. It had been more than 200 years. The scholar was long gone. The hairpin was lost in the fierce battle in the capital city. It could not be found anymore. Perhaps it really was just a dream of lovers and butterflies. Since it was a dream, there would come a day when they would wake up. Should I wake up? Maybe I have already woken up. White Fox opened his mouth and let out a breath. A different expression flashed in his eyes. He looked at Yu Qianqiu, who was waiting for his answer. He shook his head and sighed, "Perhaps. It has been a long time. I forgot and can't remember." Yu Qianqiu was stunned. It was a troublesome thing for people to live for so long. She even forgot her own name. He touched his nose and smiled. "Anyway, I have given Jinju a name today. Big sister, why don't I give you a name too?" The white fox agreed with a soft "n" sound. She had a heavy responsibility. She must give her a name worthy of her beauty. Yu Qianqiu walked around with his hands behind his back. Her surname was Bai, but what should she be called? The more he thought about it, the more he couldn't figure it out. After a long time, he scratched his head but he still couldn't figure it out. Could she be called by Meili or by Pretty Beauty? If she came up with this name, he could really be called an idiot. Yu Qianqiu painfully shook his head. He looked at the sea of flowers swaying in the wind. He wondered if Bai Xianhua would like it or not. After a moment of silence, he looked at the peerless beauty standing there with shame. He sighed. An idea flashed in his mind. A person from the myths and legends from his previous life appeared in front of him. She was also a beautiful and infatuated demon who had cultivated for 1,000 years. But she was a snake demon. Yu Qianqiu painfully groaned. Didn't they say that he was talented? Could it be that his talent could only be plagiarized? Depressing. Big sister, I thought of a name. I don't know if you like it. Bai Suzhen. What do you think? If it doesn't work, let me think again. Yu Qianqiu added. Su as in simple, Zhen as in loyal. Bai Suzhen. By Suzhan? The white fox frowned. After pondering for a while, she turned around and floated away. It seemed that she didn't like it. Yu Qianqiu felt bored. After thinking about it, he came to a sudden realization. He really wanted to slap himself twice. He really had nothing better to do. Why did he have to mention loyalty? She had finally forgotten about her past with great difficulty. Wasn't he intentionally reminding her? Thank you, little brother. I will be called by Suzhan from now on. The white fox's voice floated over with the fragrance of flowers. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. Chapter 78. Not long after, Guan Yu and Shen Feng each came back with a bag of spiritual herbs. Yu Qianqiu took them and weighed them in his hand before asking, "Is 100 enough?" "Yes. It's quite a lot." Yu Qianqiu directly poured the spiritual herbs into the storage bag and threw the 2 bags back to the 2. He smiled and said, "Continue to plant the spiritual herbs. Just wait for my good news." The 2 were so excited that they wanted to say some flattering words, but he had already disappeared. When he returned to the small house in the mulberry garden, the sky was not dark yet. Yu Qianqiu immediately fell asleep. He had to prepare for the next day. He slept until the sky was still dark. When he heard the sound of Hibiscus getting up, he knew that she was going to work. He also woke up to help. Hibiscus couldn't refuse his kindness. The 2 were like before, one carrying a pole and the other carrying a ladle. They swayed out of the mulberry garden. They didn't know that Elder Lan was staring at them with a frosty face not far away in the night. The 2 were busy until the sky was slightly bright. Yu Qianqiu stood guard at the entrance of the inner garden of the mulberry garden. When there were people coming out of the garden in 2s and 3s, Yan Zixia also came out. The 2 tacitly left the mulberry garden and walked in the direction of the river. Hibiscus, who was busy in the garden, looked at their figures. She bit her lips and subconsciously raised her hand to touch the half of her face that was already disfigured. After the 2 walked along the river for a long distance, Yu Qianqiu turned his head and looked around. When he saw that there was no one, he chuckled and said, "Zixia, did you find out about Anquangsong?" "Yes." Yan Zixia nodded and said, "I asked Aunt Lan. Anquangsong's disciple coming here has nothing to do with you. He's here to send an invitation to Fuxian Island to participate in that exorcism conference." "Exorcism conference? What does it do? Why haven't I heard of it?" Yu Qianqiu asked. Aunt Lan said that it's a conference led by Anquangsong. It seems that they're preparing to set up an organization that specializes in eradicating the demonic path. Aunt Lan didn't tell me the details, Zixia said. Anquangsong will take the lead? Hey! This Anquangsong is really jumping higher and higher. Since when did they have the right to lead the cultivation world? Yu Qianqiu shook his head and laughed. Yan Zixia admitted, Anquangsong has been very domineering in recent years. Last year, he even caused trouble in our 100 Flowers Valley. What happened? Yu Qianqiu asked curiously. As far as I know, although your 100 Flowers Valley is neither righteous nor demonic, it's not considered demonic either. What's Anquangsong doing in the 100 Flowers Valley? Yan Zixia frowned and said, sect leader Anquangsong's grandson, Lu Zhengguang, was staying in our inn in the 100 Flowers Valley. He was ambushed and injured, so he came to us to ask for an explanation. When she said the last part, her face turned slightly red. When Yan Zixia said this, he knew what was going on. Last year in the 100 Flowers Valley, the person who ambushed Lu Zhengguang was none other than him. That guy was castrated by him, but it was really hard to say this out loud. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, I'm afraid your 100 Flowers Valley is not that easy to bully. Of course, our 100 Flowers Valley just sent out a few elders and explained the reason. Didn't Anquangsong obediently retreat? Yan Zixia said with a proud expression on her face. The 2 of them chatted and laughed as they went to the secret alchemy room in the cave. As usual, Yan Zixia took out a small pile of ordinary spiritual herbs from her storage pouch. Yu Qianqiu scratched his head and said with a smile, I'm afraid I won't be able to use these things today. Yan Zixia felt strange and said, You're not practicing today. Yu Qianqiu embarrassedly took out a few spiritual herbs from his storage pouch and threw them on the ground. Yan Zixia had also stayed in the mulberry garden for a long time, so she was not unfamiliar with these spiritual herbs. She couldn't help but be surprised and said, Heart-guarding orchid, diamond fruit, gold mixed grass. These are spiritual herbs for refining foundation building pill. Yes, I'm going to refine foundation building pill today. Yu Qianqiu stared at her eyes and said to see her reaction. Yan Zixia frowned and said, Where did these spiritual herbs come from? Did you steal them from the garden? Steal them? Yu Qianqiu said gloomily, Do you think I'm that kind of person? What's more, even if I wanted to steal them, the spiritual herbs in the garden are not mature yet. Otherwise, I wouldn't have to wait for 3 years. Then where did they come from? Yan Zixia asked. Yu Qianqiu saw her asking so many questions, as if she didn't believe him. He was slightly unhappy, waved his hand and said, In any case, I didn't steal them, I'll explain it to you later. Right now the most important thing is to refine the foundation building pill. I really need it. Yan Zixia also heard the unhappy tone in his words. Biting her lips, she put the spiritual herb she just threw on the ground back into her storage pouch. The mechanism under the alchemy furnace was opened, and the surging earth fire immediately burned under the alchemy furnace. The secret room immediately became bright red, and the temperature rose in a flash. Yu Qianqiu got rid of distracting thoughts, adjusted his mood, adjusted the true qi in his body, and quietly waited for the alchemy furnace to preheat. Today's alchemy was not the same as usual. In the past, Yan Zixia brought a lot of spiritual herbs, but they were all the same common spiritual herbs, and the pills refined were also some common superficial wounds. Today's alchemy was the foundation building pill. Not only were the spiritual herbs precious, but it was also refined with 9 different spiritual herbs. It was not like refining a single one like before, and it also had a high requirement for the control of the divine sense. Last night, Yu Qianqiu had memorized the refining method and steps in the jade butterfly pill recipe. He recited it fluently in his heart, and without any mistakes, he couldn't help but feel a little excited. The alchemy furnace was almost preheated. Standing on the side, his face hurt. Yu Qianqiu quickly put the 9 spiritual herbs into the alchemy furnace. Circulating his true qi, he hit the lid of the furnace with his palm, and the lid closed with a pang sound. Not daring to hesitate, his divine sense quickly entered the alchemy furnace, and controlled the steaming hot air, quickly separating the 9 spiritual herbs. Not long after, the spiritual herbs in the 9 directions were all refined into a paste, and the 9 balls of air swirled in the air. After stabilizing, his divine sense rushed to the dirt-dispelling grass paste in the middle, and with great difficulty, it was divided into 8 parts, and slowly drifted in the 8 directions of the spiritual herbs. Suddenly, the 8 big and 8 small balls of paste in the furnace shook. Yu Qianqiu secretly shouted, Not good. Controlling 16 balls with his divine sense at once was a little difficult. When the dirt-dispelling grass was separated further and further, his divine sense finally couldn't control it, and the 16 balls of paste fell together on the red-hot bottom of the furnace, instantly turning into flying ash. It's over. The spiritual herbs for a foundation building pill were all gone. Yu Qianqiu retracted his divine sense, and regretfully opened his eyes. High in the air, he hit the lid of the furnace with his palm. The lid bounced up, and a ball of black ash sprayed out from the furnace. His nose and mouth could smell a burnt smell. Yan Zixia, who had been watching from the side, naturally knew that he had failed. She felt a little sad for him, and comforted him, Qianqiu, it's okay. After all, very few people can succeed on their first try. Yu Qianqiu shook his head with a bitter smile. Spirit Dawn of the foundation building pills level were different from other low-level Spirit Dawn. They absolutely couldn't contain any impurities, or else it would definitely affect the efficacy of the Spirit Dawn. Foundation building was not easy, and if a foundation building pill with mediocre efficacy was added, then it would really make people cry. The effect of the dirt-dispelling grass was to remove the impurities in the spirit dawn, and the step of fusing it with other spiritual herbs was not something that could be avoided. Chapter 79. You don't need to comfort me, it's okay. Yu Qianqiu walked to the side, took out a middle-grade spirit stone, sat down cross-legged, and absorbed the spiritual energy into his body to repair his slightly damaged divine sense and true qi. Yan Zixia silently stood on the side, no longer saying anything. She put herself in his shoes. If she had not built her foundation and finally got a set of spirit herbs to refine a foundation-building pill, but then failed, one could imagine how she would feel. After restoring his body to its best state, Yu Qianqiu stood up and stretched his arms and chest, relaxing his muscles and bones. Under Yan Zixia's attentive gaze, he took out another set of spirit herbs from his storage pouch. He has more? Yan Zixia was slightly stunned, and immediately shouted, "Wait." Yu Qianqiu turned around and asked, "What's wrong?" Yan Zixia explained, "I don't mean anything else, leave your set of spirit herbs first. I'll go ask great-grandma, let her help you refine it. I think with her help, the success rate must be higher." Yu Qianqiu waved his hand, No, I think it's better not to let her know about this. Failure is the mother of success, failure is a habit. Isn't it just a set of spirit herbs, it's okay." In his heart, he thought, damn, if it wasn't because I really can't find a place to refine pills, I don't even want to tell you. If that old granny knows I have spirit herbs so soon, who knows what the consequences will be. Yan Zixia didn't think so. The scene of Yu Qianqiu kneeling for the spirit herb seed was still vivid in her mind. It showed how important this spirit herb was to him. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she didn't say anything. The furnace was hot. Yu Qianqiu threw the spirit herbs in, waved his hand to cover the furnace, and used his divine sense to control the spirit herbs to separate and refine. When the dirt-dispelling grass paste was separated, he concentrated and was extremely careful. Unfortunately, his divine sense wasn't strong enough, and he failed again. If it wasn't for the pill recipe requiring the 8 spirit herbs to be refined at the same time, Yu Qianqiu really wanted to fuse them one by one. Biting her lips, Yan Zixia silently watched as Yu Qianqiu cleaned the ashes from the furnace and retrieved spiritual stones to recover his divine sense and true qi. She couldn't help but blame him for not listening to her advice. When Yu Qianqiu took out the 3rd set of spiritual grass, Yan Zixia's lips parted slightly in surprise. This was only possible for a great sect like the supporting Immortal Island. If it was any other sect, it would not be easy to gather 3 sets of spirit herbs to refine the foundation establishment pill. One must know that a set of spirit herbs to refine the foundation establishment pill could be sold for a lot of spirit stones in the cultivation world. If the conditions weren't right, one could imagine the consequences of trying to forcefully concoct the pellet. After failing again and again, Yu Qianqiu was starting to get a headache. He had already destroyed 10 sets of spiritual herbs, but he couldn't even fuse the dirt-dispelling grass. Although he still had 90 sets of spiritual herbs to back him up, he still couldn't make it. He clenched his teeth and tried 2 more sets of spiritual herbs. Every time, he almost failed. Thinking about the process of concoction, he realized that there was a problem with his mental state. He was impatient, nervous, excited, and his mental state was very unstable. His divine sense was originally not strong enough. Coupled with these factors that affected his control over his divine sense, he was afraid that this was the reason why he failed. Since he found the source of the problem, he would naturally have a solution. At least, that was what he thought. He took out the spirit stones and slowly absorbed the spiritual energy into his body. Then, he slowly recovered his true qi and divine sense. After recovering, he was not in a hurry to concoct the pellet. Instead, he relaxed his mental state and entered a state of emptiness. Yan Zixia had been paying attention to him. She didn't know why he needed such a long time to recover this time. After sitting cross-legged for a long time, Yu Qianqiu slowly let out a breath. He stood up and quietly walked to the front of the furnace. There was no expression on his face. He casually took out a set of spiritual herbs from his storage bag and threw them into the furnace. Then, he closed the furnace lid. With the assistance of the previous dozen times, his movements were very smooth. His divine sense controlled the spiritual herbs and refined them. The paste of the dirt-dispelling grass was once again divided into 8 parts. However, he was not in a hurry to fuse them. He carefully felt the 16 balls of paste. After confirming that there was no problem with his mental state, he calmly controlled the 8 drops of paste to the other 8 balls of spiritual herbs. His divine sense was not strong enough to drive things. He could only stir the airflow in the furnace to drive it. This was the difference between reaching the foundation building stage and not reaching the foundation building stage. However, it also consumed more energy and true chi. With a calm mental state, there was really an effect. The 8 drops of dirt-dispelling grass were smoothly integrated into the 8 spiritual herbs. The 8 balls of chaos were also a lot bigger. Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but become excited. His mood fluctuated. The 8 spiritual herbs floating in the furnace also swayed. Yu Qianqiu was shocked. He immediately calmed down. The 16 balls became 8. It was much easier for his divine sense to control them. The next step was to remove the impurities in the spiritual herbs. After the 8 balls of paste were injected with the dirt-dispelling grass, they changed. The original paste gradually became clear. His divine sense controlled the airflow produced by the high temperature and spun the 8 spiritual herbs. As the spinning speed became faster and faster, impurities were thrown out. Seeing that the 8 balls of paste were about to turn into clear liquids of different colors, Yu Qianqiu suddenly felt that his true qi was insufficient. Controlling the airflow with his divine sense at such a high speed consumed too much true qi. F***ck. Yu Qianqiu groaned in pain in his heart. If he had known this would happen, he would have grabbed 2 handfuls of spirit stones. The step of removing the impurities was about to succeed, but his true qi was insufficient. How could he have the energy to split his divine sense to take out spirit stones from Utopia? He could only blame himself for not having enough experience. He could only watch as the 8 balls of spiritual liquid worshipped each other. He retracted his divine sense and opened the lid. This time, not only was there a ball of black ash, there was also a fragrant mist. Yu Qianqiu felt his heart ache. Yan Zixia could also see that Yu Qianqiu had improved compared to before. Although she had never concocted a foundation-building pill before, her cultivation level was still there. She wanted to help, but Yu Qianqiu wouldn't let her. He stubbornly insisted on doing it herself. His body had recovered to its best state. Learning from his previous lesson, he took out a few handfuls of high-grade spirit stones and put them on his belt so that he could easily get them when he needed them. When he felt that his true qi was insufficient again, Yu Qianqiu quickly took out a high-grade spirit stone from his waist and absorbed the spiritual energy into his body to replenish his true qi. After using 2 high-grade spirit stones in a row, the 8 balls of chaos finally turned into crystal-clear liquids of different colors. They floated in the furnace, looking very beautiful. His divine sense controlled the airflow and rearranged the essence of the 8 spiritual herbs. The gold chaos grass was placed in the middle. Although the medicinal effect of the spiritual herbs was magical, it was also very overbearing for the human body. Not to mention that taking several spiritual herbs at once was very difficult for the human body to bear. The role of the gold chaos grass was to neutralize the medicinal effect and prevent the different effects of the spiritual herbs from conflicting. The airflow rushed to the gold chaos grass spiritual liquid, divided it into 7 parts and smoothly merged with the other spiritual liquids. Then the liquid of the 100-year-old ginseng and the 100-year-old lingji was adjusted and merged into a large ball. These 2 were good things to replenish the vitality. A large ball of nourishing spiritual liquid was again divided into 5 groups and merged with the remaining 5 spiritual liquids. It was to supplement the body's vitality when the medicinal effect of the spiritual herbs played a role in the body, so that the body would not be damaged. After doing this, Yu Qianqiu did not dare to be careless. Now it was the most critical moment. He once again absorbed a spirit stone to replenish his true qi and restore his divine sense. After adjusting the state of his body, except for the spirit-gathering grass, the other 4 spiritual herbs rushed together. The airflow stirred them into a ball until they were mixed evenly. Then, they were quickly divided into 10 equal parts and placed in the center of the furnace to be baked. His divine sense tried its best to control the high temperature in the furnace and concentrate on the 10 fist-sized liquid. Moreover, he also had to maintain the 10 balls of liquid to turn evenly. To maintain such control, the consumption of true qi and divine sense was like running water. Yu Qianqiu was miserable. Fortunately, he had the foresight to insert a pile of upper-grade spirit stones into his belt. When he felt a little exhausted, he would immediately take out a spirit stone to absorb and replenish it. Yan Zixia, who was on the side, was dumbfounded. She had never seen someone refine pills like this. It was simply piling up spiritual herbs and spirit stones. In just 3 months, he had probably used more than 2,000 upper-grade spirit stones, which was equivalent to more than 20 million lower-grade spirit stones. Anyway, as the eldest miss of the 100 Flowers Palace, she had never used so many spirit stones. The dozens of spiritual herbs were even more frightening. Even a big sect like the Supporting Immortals Island could barely gather 10 sets every 3 years. Yu Qianqiu had taken out 14 sets so far. Moreover, she did not know whether he had more in his storage bag. Looking at his current state, he might really have to refine a furnace for him. Yan Zixia speechlessly shook her head and smiled bitterly. No wonder he wanted to refine it himself. With such a solid foundation, not only could he improve his alchemy skills, but he could also pile it up. Where did he get this thing that was comparable to the strength of a sect? The 10 fist-sized liquid gradually became dim from the beginning. Their volume also shrunk by half, and they were still shrinking. When they were the size of an egg, his divine sense quickly moved the spiritual liquid of the spirit-gathering grass to the top of the furnace. It was evenly divided into 10 parts, corresponding to the 10 balls that had just formed the pill. As they rotated at a uniform speed, the spiritual liquid of the spirit-gathering grass adhered to the surface evenly. The function of the spirit-gathering grass was to lock the medicinal efficacy of the spirit pill and prevent it from evaporating. For a foundation-building pill, even a slight loss of medicinal efficacy would be enough to affect the success or failure of a cultivator who wanted to build his foundation. After doing all this, the last step was to roast it and shape it. There should not be any more major problems. With 10 foundation-building pills in front of him, even if Yu Qianqiu could control himself, he could not help but feel a little excited. Chapter 80. The 10 foundation-building pills in the furnace shook slightly. Yu Qianqiu was shocked. Since ancient times, there were many examples of people failing on the verge of success. He was secretly alarmed. He quickly calmed his mind and carefully took care of the 10 treasures. His cultivation level was not high. Refining pills in the aura refining realm was already a forced move, but it was not comparable to Ma Zhigu's abnormal cultivation level. Ma Zhigu's divine sense could freely control the pills in the furnace even though she was by the sea. Not long after, a wisp of green smoke rose from the top of the furnace, and the fragrance of pills overflowed from the furnace. Done? Although Yan Zixia knew it was almost done, she was still a little surprised. She had taken foundation-building pills before, so she was familiar with this fragrance. It was the fragrance of foundation-building pills, and it seemed to be stronger than the foundation-building pills she had taken before. She secretly pondered, I wonder how many pills he can refine in this furnace. Rise! Yu Qianqiu shouted. His voice was so excited that it changed its tone. As he split the furnace lid with his palm, he quickly withdrew his divine sense. Several purple shadows rushed out of the furnace due to the oppressive airflow in the furnace. Yu Qianqiu quickly jumped up and pulled up the hem of his gown. The 10 purple shadows were all wrapped in it. After landing on the ground, he opened up the hem, and a tempting smell hit his face. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He couldn't help but laugh, fresh out of the furnace. Fresh out of the furnace, foundation-building pills. I've succeeded. That smug look on his face was extremely annoying. He couldn't be blamed for being like this. After pursuing it day after day, anyone would be excited when it was realized. Yan Zixia quickly walked over and pulled open her clothes. Inside were a bunch of shiny purple pills. After counting them, she cried out in surprise, 10 pills. She couldn't help but stretch out her slender fingers and pinch one. She could still feel the slight heat in her hand. It was a lot. She put it in front of her nose and smelled it. Its color and smell were very pure. There was a faint layer of purple light on the outside of the pill. Obviously, it was a very successful furnace of pills. Yan Zixia was surprised, but a trace of envy appeared on her face. Even with her cultivation level, even if she was given more than 10 sets of 9-scented spiritual grasses to concoct foundation-building dawn, she wouldn't be able to guarantee that she would be able to concoct 10 foundation-building dawn in one furnace. Once she left the furnace, there would definitely be a few useless foundation-building dawn. Not to mention, she didn't even know the specific steps and methods to concoct foundation-building dawn. When the elixirs came out of the furnace just now, she clearly saw that there were 10 elixirs, no more, no less. Now that they were right in front of her, there was indeed not a single useless elixir. Qianqiu, who taught you this alchemy method? Yan Zixia asked as she put down the pill in her hand. Yu Qianqiu was looking at the pills and smiling foolishly. He didn't expect that he could concoct a furnace of pills with just a dozen sets of spiritual herbs. He had originally planned to concoct a furnace of pills with just a few dozen sets. It was really too unexpected. When he heard what she said, he put the medicinal pills into his storage bag, rubbed his nose and said with a smile, I figured it out myself. Didn't you see that I spent more than a dozen sets of spiritual plants to test it out? Ah. You figured it out yourself. Yan Zixia didn't suspect that he was lying, and said anxiously, Qianqiu, quickly memorize the steps and methods of your alchemy. You mustn't forget them. Yu Qianqiu was stunned, and asked, why? Don't you know? Although we use the same spiritual plants, the steps of alchemy are different for every sect and sect. A good recipe is a priceless treasure. Yan Zixia poured out everything she knew. When he heard that, Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed. The alchemy sect's pill recipe Jade Disc was indeed not ordinary. Any random foundation-building pill recipe could be treated as a treasure. That brat Lu Jingguang's castration was worth it. However, he didn't think about it. Every single pill recipe in that pill recipe Jade Disc, every single step and method of alchemy, were the crystallization of countless generations of the alchemy sect's painstaking efforts. If it weren't for that, with his loser standards, how could he possibly concoct a furnace of 10 pills with 100% success? Even if he did succeed, it would be strange if he didn't end up mostly crippled. It seemed like he hadn't seen the scene of crippled pills yet, so he didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Yu Qianqiu wasn't prepared to tell her about the pill recipe yet. He nodded solemnly, and said, N. Zixia, thank you for your reminder. I understand, I'll think about it carefully now. Oh right, Zixia, can you get me something to eat? I'm a little hungry. He was wholeheartedly immersed in alchemy, and indeed hadn't eaten a drop of water for 2 days. Okay, I'll go get it for you now. Before Yan Zixia left, she didn't forget to remind him, you must remember this. After she left, Yu Qianqiu mumbled, remember my ass. I've remembered it since a year ago. Now I should think about what to do. I don't know if this girl's mouth is tight or not. No, 10 foundation building dawn is really not enough. Aside from myself, there's still Guan Yu, Chen Feng, and little Tian. In the future, there might be even more lackeys waiting for me to subdue. Not to mention, I don't know how many foundation building dawn I'll use to successfully build my foundation. It seems like I can't be in a hurry to build my foundation right now. Yan Zixia flew back and forth by herself, so she came back very quickly. Not only did she bring the barbecued meat that Yu Qianqiu liked to eat, she also brought a bottle of wine. She seemed to be congratulating him. After Yu Qianqiu ate and drank to his heart's content, he patted his stomach and said, I've already memorized it. Now, let's confirm the effect. With a successful experience, it would save a lot of time and effort to concoct again. When the furnace of foundation building dawn came out, Yan Zixia was speechless. Unexpectedly, there were 10 foundation-building dawn in each furnace, and there wasn't a single waste dan. This success rate was a bit too high. Even if it was her great-grandmother, she might not necessarily be able to do it. After more than 10 furnaces, because he had been concocting the same kind of dan, he was already familiar with the things he needed to pay attention to. As the saying goes, practice makes perfect. When he had concocted the 50th batch, he had a fixed pattern. The control of the spiritual liquid inside the furnace was as easy as blowing off dust. He also knew how to control the heat flow inside the furnace by borrowing force. A furnace of dawn came out without using a single spirit stone. If other people saw this, who would believe that this was a chi refining stage disciple concocting dawn? However, no one could be like him, using a pile of precious spiritual herbs and high-grade spirit stones to practice. Towards the end, when a furnace of foundation-building dawn came out, there was no joy or worry on his face. He was already numb, as if concocting foundation-building dawn was as easy as eating a meal. Even Yan Zixia, who was watching from the side, was a bit numb. After concocting 100 batches of spiritual herbs, a full 10 days had passed. During this time, one furnace of dawn was destroyed, and it was due to his carelessness. Counting the 100 batches of spiritual herbs, he had actually succeeded in concocting 96 batches. Each batch contained 10 dawn. He had already concocted 960 foundation-building dawn. The earth fire that had been burning under the furnace for more than 10 days was finally sealed. Yu Qianqiu clapped his hands and exhaled, saying, "I'm done." Yan Zixia had also forgotten to count how many furnaces he had concocted. She walked over and asked, "You're not concocting anymore?" To be honest, watching someone do the same thing every day, knowing the result, was really boring. "I'm not concocting anymore. I've already memorized the method. It seems that the concocting method I figured out is still a so-so." Yu Qianqiu smiled. Yan Zixia rolled her eyes at him. She didn't care what he said. She had already thought it through. No matter how good the recipe was, she was too embarrassed to ask for it. If she asked for it, and he didn't give it to her, wouldn't that be too embarrassing? After all, it was not an ordinary pill recipe. Even if he gave it to her, she would owe him a huge favor. How was she supposed to repay him in the future? Chapter 81. The air was fresh, the sky was blue, the grass was green, the river was flowing, and Yan Zixia's figure was curvy. Along the way, Yu Qianqiu was in a good mood. He had more than 900 foundation-building pills on him. He believed that no matter how bad his aptitude was, he could still succeed in building his foundation. Qianqiu. Yes. Are you going to prepare to build your foundation when you go back? Yan Zixia asked. Yu Qianqiu answered without hesitation, yes. Do you still remember that you owe me a song? Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, I remember. I've been busy concocting pills recently. After I build my foundation, I'll definitely think of a song for you. He didn't really want to give her a song at that time and was just perfunctory. Now, he couldn't think of a suitable song for her. After walking for a while, Yan Zixia asked again, do you want me to protect you when you build your foundation? Heh. No need. I'll just find a quiet place to hide. Yu Qianqiu refused. He also knew that no one could disturb him when he was building his foundation. Otherwise, he might go berserk. However, there was probably no safer place than Utopia in this world. He didn't even tell Chu Ping about that place, and it was not convenient to tell her now. Seeing that he refused, Yan Zixia bit her lip and didn't say anything. In his previous life, Yu Qianqiu was also a person who often visited flowers. Naturally, he could see that she was unhappy because of his refusal. He leaned over without hesitation, raised his hand, and slapped her perky buttocks. Ah! Yan Zixia screamed. She was accidentally attacked by the bad guy again. She blushed and quickly ran to the side. The assailant laughed proudly. After returning to the mulberry garden, the couple went back to their respective homes. When he returned to the house, the scene in front of him made Yu Qianqiu slightly stunned. Furong was actually covered with a quilt and lying on the bed with her back facing the outside. It was a bit unbelievable. Usually, even at night, she would sit cross-legged on the bed and cultivate. Martial Aunt Furong. Are you alright? Yu Qianqiu asked. Furong didn't say anything. Her head was also covered with the quilt, so she couldn't see what was wrong with her. Raising his hand, he wanted to pull the blanket away to take a look, but after thinking about it, he gave up. No matter how ugly she was still a woman. She was kind enough to let him stay with her, but he was pulling her blanket. What was going on? Martial uncle, are you asleep? Yu Qianqiu shouted again. Hibiscus still didn't respond. It was a little strange. Yu Qianqiu shrugged his shoulders helplessly. He would go back to build his foundation first. He would come back to ask after he succeeded. He disappeared from his bed. If there was anyone that Guan Yu and Chen Feng missed the most during this period of time, it would undoubtedly be their boss, Yu Qianqiu. He had been gone for more than 10 days. There was no news at all. The two of them were worried sick. Even if he couldn't refine the foundation building pill, he should at least come back and say hello. We don't blame you. In any case, there are plenty of spiritual herbs. You just have to continue working hard. The two of them lay on the bamboo pavilion's stone platform listlessly. They didn't have the energy to do anything. The days of waiting were so painful. In the distance, Little Red Rabbit and Bai Suzhen wandered about in the sea of flowers. Boss is back. Chen Feng's eyes lit up, and he stood up. Where? Guan Yu's back was facing the outside, so he didn't see it for a moment. When he turned around, he saw Yu Qianqiu walking over from the forest listlessly just like them. Guan Yu and Chen Feng looked at each other, a bad premonition spreading in their eyes. The pill concoction this time was probably fraught with grim possibilities. Otherwise, they wouldn't have seen boss like this. From the moment Yu Qianqiu appeared, Bai Suzhen already knew. Looking from afar, she couldn't help but frown. The former's dejected appearance fell into her eyes. She patted the little colt and said, Red Rabbit, let's go back. Boss. You're back. Guan Yu and Chen Feng walked out of the courtyard made of bamboo and welcomed him together. They both wanted to ask how the pill concoction was going, but when they saw boss's appearance, they couldn't bring themselves to ask. The two of them hugged him and sat down in the bamboo pavilion. Yu Qianqiu rested his elbow on the stone platform, his fingers pinching his forehead silently. Not long after, Bai Suzhen leisurely walked into the courtyard and asked, What's wrong? Yeah. Boss, what's wrong? Boss, if there's anything, just say it. We're not outsiders here. When Bai Suzhen opened her mouth, the two of them couldn't wait to ask about it, but they just had to avoid the thing they wanted to know the most. How was the foundation building pill going? Yu Qianqiu secretly laughed in his heart. Let's see how long you can hold it in. He waved his hand at them and said, Nothing much, I'm just really tired these few days. I'll be fine after some rest. After dilly-dallying for a while, Chen Feng finally couldn't help but ask, Boss, have you concocted the foundation building pill? Yu Qianqiu straightforwardly said, I have. Guan Yu's eyes lit up, and he asked, How's the concoction going? Yu Qianqiu indifferently said, Nothing much. Hearing this, the two of them's expressions darkened, and Chen Feng said regretfully, Did they all fail? What did you say? Yu Qianqiu's beady eyes widened, and he said, Have you ever seen me fail? Every time he encountered such a situation, he would always think of a way to increase his boss's prestige without holding back. Bai Suzhen, who had always been a bystander, was the clearest about this. She knew what he was going to do, so she turned around and smiled. Guan Yu and Chen Feng looked at each other, and they instantly became excited. The former stuttered, B-boss, where's the foundation? Foundation building pill? Where is it? This was the thing that Guan Yu had been looking forward to the most since he was chased out of Fuxian Island, so how could he not be excited? Chen Feng, on the other hand, never thought that this day would really come. Two useless things, a mere foundation building pill can make you so excited. How are you going to do great things with me in the future? Calm down, you have to be calm, you have to be as calm as me, understand? Yu Qianqiu said disdainfully. As he spoke, he took out 2 purple pills from his storage bag, and the fragrance of the pills instantly filled the bamboo pavilion. Even Bai Suzhen couldn't help but take a few more glances. The two of them repeatedly admitted their mistakes, yes, yes, yes. However, their eyes were fixed on the 2 purple pills. Guan Yu even cried out in surprise, it's really the foundation building pill. He had taken 3 before, but unfortunately, he didn't succeed in building his foundation, so he naturally recognized it. The 2 quail-sized foundation building pills were pinched in his palm, and he put them away. Guan Yu and Chen Feng were stunned, they didn't know what boss meant. Could it be that he didn't want to give them to them? Yu Qianqiu held the foundation building pills with his hands behind his back, and said with a serious expression, don't worry, I will definitely give you these foundation building pills. Also, I will give you a choice. I will give each of you 1 foundation building pill. If you are willing to leave, I will let you go, and I will even beg my sister to return your natal primordial spirits, and from then on, we will have nothing to do with each other. There is another choice, I will still give you the foundation building pills, you can choose to stay, but from then on, you have to sincerely treat me as boss, and follow my orders. Think about it. Guan Yu, I know you have always been unconvinced by me as boss, you go first. The two of them looked at each other, they didn't know why Yu Qianqiu would say this. Bai Suzhen also looked over in shock. After a moment of silence, it was Chen Feng who took a step forward, bowed, and said, from now on, Chen Feng will only follow boss's orders, I will not have any other thoughts. If I go against this oath, may the heavens and earth destroy me. When he first arrived, he really didn't like Yu Qianqiu, but after being fooled a few times, he naturally didn't know that he was being fooled, so he already had some sort of blind worship for Yu Qianqiu, which was why he swore such a heavy oath. Yu Qianqiu nodded his head in satisfaction, then turned his gaze to Guan Yu. Guan Yu hesitated. He was much older than Chen Feng, so his eyes were naturally more mature. Actually, it didn't matter if he stayed, and it didn't matter if he sincerely treated Yu Qianqiu as boss, the key was that the temptation of the natal primordial spirit was too great. At least from now on, he wouldn't be controlled by others at all times. But with 1 foundation building pill, could he really build his foundation successfully? If he couldn't build his foundation successfully, what could he do even if he left? On the contrary, since Yu Qianqiu could successfully refine it the first time, he could refine it a second and a third time. What this place didn't lack the least were spiritual herbs. Most importantly, even if he wanted to leave, would Yu Qianqiu really let him go? Wasn't he afraid that he would leak the secret here? Thinking of this, Guan Yu was a little annoyed. Chen Feng, this be asterisk starred. So be it. Why did he have to make such a heavy oath? It should be known that cultivators, regardless of their cultivation, were different from ordinary people in the secular world. Once they made an oath, if they went against it, it would come true. But since he had already made an oath, it wouldn't be right if he didn't. After hesitating for a while, Guan Yu gritted his teeth, bowed, and said, from now on, Guan Yu will only follow boss's orders, I will not have any other thoughts. If I go against this oath, may the heavens and earth destroy me. Good. Yu Qianqiu shouted. He turned his back to the two of them and raised his head to laugh. Suddenly, he turned around and glanced at the two of them coldly. His eyes were cold and emotionless, and a decisive and domineering aura surged out from his body. Under that aura, Guan Yu and Chen Feng actually subconsciously took a step back. The two of them were shocked. Bai Suzhen didn't blink. This was the first time she saw Yu Qianqiu with such an aura. In the blink of an eye, it was as if he had changed into a different person. It was as if she didn't recognize him. She could be considered to have seen the world. This kind of aura could only be emitted by someone who had been in a high position for a long time and was iron-blooded and murderous. It wasn't something that could be faked. Yu Qianqiu glanced at the two of them coldly and finally landed on Guan Yu. He stared for a long time until the latter felt a little scared. Then, he slowly said, "One day, the two of you will be proud of your choice." Chen Feng's mouth opened slightly and he swallowed with difficulty. He never thought that boss had such a side to him. He was really unfathomable. The admiration in his heart couldn't help but increase a little. Just when the few of them were shocked, Yu Qianqiu suddenly returned to his usual smiling expression, making Guan Yu and Chen Feng very uncomfortable. Yu Qianqiu took out his hand from behind his back and spread out the 2 foundation-building pills in his palm. He smiled at the two of them and said, "Each of you can take one. I wish the two of you succeed in building your foundation soon." Chapter 82. The two of them were still not used to his fickleness. They nervously took a foundation-building pill each and bowed together. "Thank you, boss." Yu Qianqiu smiled. "What are you thanking me for? Let's quickly find a place to build our foundation." The two of them excitedly returned to their respective rooms in the bamboo house. As he watched the two of them leave, Yu Qianqiu narrowed his eyes. A cold light flashed in his eyes. If someone had really chosen to leave just now, he would not have hesitated to kill them. Apart from being afraid of revealing his secret, he could strongly feel that after passing the foundation building stage, their future path would be different. He could guarantee that the two of them would definitely succeed in building their foundation because he had enough foundation building pills in his hands. However, he did not need a disloyal subordinate. With the small interlude just now, if the two of them failed to build their foundation, he would once again take out foundation building pills for them. Every time they failed, he would give them another foundation building pill, until they succeeded. He believed that repeated efforts would be more touching than a one-time effort. This was also the reason why he did not tell the two of them that he had a lot of foundation building pills. If he wanted to become a real boss, the necessary strategy was unavoidable. It was not to target someone. Returning to his senses, he took out a foundation building pill. With a light leap, he simply sat cross-legged on the stone platform. He turned his head towards Bai Suzhen in the courtyard and smiled. He opened his mouth and swallowed the foundation building pill. The pill tasted a little sweet and bitter. Before he could recover from the taste, it had already slipped into his stomach. He slowly closed his eyes and began to circulate his qi. Not long after, his body trembled as if he had been struck by lightning. A warm current surged from his abdomen to his surroundings, rushing to every part of his body. The strength was very strong and very overbearing. The Dan was refined by Yu Qianqiu himself. He knew that the effect of the forging tendon grass in the building foundation Dan had begun to take effect. The effect of the forging tendon grass was to destroy and expand the tendons and veins in the body. It could be regarded as one of the most important spirit herbs in the building foundation Dan. Equally important was the ice spirit seed. It had the effect of repairing the tendons and veins. In the beginning, it felt like a hot current, but soon, it felt like a volcano was about to erupt. Wave after wave of the foundation building pellet rushed into every part of his body. It was so painful that he wanted to die. After a while, Yu Qianqiu felt like his soul had left his body. He didn't expect that the medicinal effect of the foundation building pellet would be so overbearing. If he waited until the medicinal effect of the whole foundation building pellet completely dissolved, he really didn't know how he would be able to endure it. If he could see his appearance now, he would definitely be shocked. The pores all over his body began to ooze black mucus. It was the first time for Bai Suzhen to see a person take a Dan to build his foundation. The painful expression on Yu Qianqiu's face made her frown slightly. She was a demon, not a human, so she didn't need to take the Dan to improve her cultivation. However, demon cultivators also had their own way of suffering to improve their cultivation, which was no less than that of humans. Yu Qianqiu really felt that he couldn't endure it anymore. He had already entered a semi-conscious state. Suddenly, a warm current went straight up his back and rushed into his brain. His muddle-headed brain instantly became sober. The medicinal effect of the heart-guarding orchid had taken effect. It was still okay if he was not sober. Once he was sober, he could clearly feel the pain his body was enduring. At this time, he could no longer operate his cultivation to dissolve the Dan. All of his true chi had retracted back into his dantian. The tendons and veins in his body had been destroyed by the forging tendon grass, so he could no longer operate his cultivation normally. He could only rely on the building foundation Dan to operate on his own. Yu Qianqiu secretly smiled bitterly. His body felt like it was being roasted by fire and cut by thousands of knives. Because of the effect of the heart-guarding orchid, he could endure all of this with a clear mind. He estimated that he wouldn't be able to stop for at least 2 or 3 hours. Just when he was in so much pain that he wanted to scream, he didn't know how much time had passed. A cool feeling flowed from his abdomen to all parts of his body. The ice spirit seed that Yu Qianqiu had been looking forward to for a long time finally took effect. The broken tendons and veins began to repair. Wherever the cool feeling went, the tendons and veins gradually recovered. The heat in his body began to disperse. The places that had been cut by thousands of knives also felt like being gently caressed by a breeze. The comfortable feeling was indescribable. Yu Qianqiu felt so comfortable that he wanted to moan. Time passed slowly. What followed was the medicinal effect of the diamond fruit. It brought a slight electric shock numbness. The numbness spread along the tendons and veins, stabilizing the damaged and repaired tendons and veins. This feeling was neither painful nor uncomfortable. It was thousands of times better than the tyranny of the tendon-forging grass. When all of the sensations receded like the tide, Yu Qianqiu felt a little drowsy. His whole body, including his spirit, felt very tired. He wanted to sleep. The destruction of his body and the reconstruction of it had consumed too much of his yuan qi. Fortunately, the 100-year ginseng and 100-year ganoderma contained in the pill were great for replenishing his yuan qi. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago with just the yuan qi in his body. He shook his head to dispel the drowsiness. He operated his martial arts to check his body. The result was very painful. He had failed to build his foundation. Just now, he felt that his whole body was suffering, but in fact, only about 1/10 of the tendons and veins in his body had expanded. In other words, the foundation building pill had only allowed less than 1/10 of the body to build his foundation. In short, he had failed to build his foundation. Helplessly opening his eyes, he found Bai Suzhen standing in front of him with an inquiring expression. Yu Qianqiu shook his head and smiled bitterly. Just as he opened his mouth, he was shocked by his own voice. His voice was so hoarse that it didn't sound like he was speaking. He swallowed his saliva with difficulty and prepared to accept his own voice. He said, "Sister, I failed." Bai Suzhen frowned. At this time, Guan Yu and Chen Feng also rushed out of the bamboo house at the same time. The 3 people who had just built their foundation looked at each other, then looked at their own bodies. They found that their bodies were covered in a layer of black sticky substance. The 3 of them asked in a croaky voice whether they had succeeded or failed to build their foundation. In the end, they all failed. Yu Qianqiu pointed at the spirit stones outside and said in a hoarse voice, "Everyone, don't be discouraged. First use the spirit stones to recover your strength. I still have some foundation building pills here." As he said that, he took out 2 foundation building pills and threw them over. The 2 of them caught them and nodded their heads in joy to express their gratitude. Then, they quickly ran over to the pile of spirit stones. Yu Qianqiu smiled apologetically at Bai Suzhen and immediately took out a spirit stone to recover his body. The latter slightly shook her head. After recovering his strength, he swallowed another foundation building pill. The same pain began again. Judging from the result of building his foundation just now, he reckoned that he wouldn't succeed this time. As expected, he failed again. Dejectedly, Guan Yu walked over with his head hung low. He also failed again. Surprisingly, among the 3, Chen Feng succeeded the second time. After using 2 foundation building pills, Chen Feng was so excited that he almost went crazy. He ran to Yu Qianqiu who was sitting on the stone platform and kowtowed. It was obvious that he was sincerely grateful to Yu Qianqiu. Damn it. This time, he really lost face. As the boss, he actually lost to the little brother. Yu Qianqiu cursed in his heart. He was very ashamed. Luckily, his face was covered by the black mucus, so his expression couldn't be seen. He threw another foundation-building pill to Guan Yu and swallowed one himself. In the end, the two unlucky fellows still failed. Yu Qianqiu made up his mind and threw one foundation-building pill after another to Guan Yu. He also swallowed one after another, but he still failed again and again. When the two of them used the seventh foundation-building pill, Guan Yu screamed in the bamboo house. He also succeeded. He rushed out and knelt in front of Yu Qianqiu. He kowtowed heavily a few times with sincerity. 7 foundation-building pills. Even if he had 2 immortal supporting badges and could return to Fuxian Island twice, he would only get 6 foundation-building pills. He still wouldn't succeed. He couldn't repay this kindness. These were his heartfelt words. Yu Qianqiu felt ashamed to face the two of them, but he didn't know that Chen Feng, who had washed himself clean, was secretly worshipping his boss. His boss actually had so many foundation-building pills that cultivators treated as treasures. He swallowed them one by one like they were candy. Who else in the cultivation world was more awesome than his boss? After all, foundation-building pills were foundation-building pills, not candy. There would definitely be an effect if he ate a lot of them. When the 12th foundation-building pill's medicinal effects completely dissolved, Yu Qianqiu's body trembled. He felt like he was floating, and all the cells in his body seemed to have been reborn. The vital energy in his dantian automatically flowed into his meridians and circulated rapidly, turning into liquid vital energy before returning to his dantian. His body was so light, and the range of his divine sense had doubled. This kind of wonderful feeling was something that he couldn't feel when he was climbing the Qi refinement realm. Yu Qianqiu knew that he had succeeded. He directly bounced up from the stone platform, broke through the bamboo pavilion, and landed in the courtyard. Following that, he let out a long roar. The entire utopia's expression changed, and the ground seemed to be trembling and buzzing in response to his roar. The people in the courtyard almost couldn't stand steadily. Everyone was shocked, not knowing why Yu Qianqiu would have such a reaction after successfully building his foundation-building pill. Chapter 83. The sky rumbled, and the originally white sky where the sun could not be seen suddenly became cloudy and clear. After a few moments, there was another loud noise in the sky, and the white mist suddenly gathered and scattered, changing its color, forming a dense layer of dark clouds, within which there were constantly sounds of thunder accompanied by lightning. The sky changed color. What was going on? They had never seen such a thing before. Facing the might of heaven and earth, that kind of powerful momentum made them feel powerless. Everyone felt like they had become ants, and their faces changed color. Bai Suzhen knew that after Yu Qianqiu's cultivation increased, the space's territory would also expand. She had also seen it before, but she had never seen such a scene. Looking at the lightning in the dark clouds, that powerful force that could destroy everything, Bai Suzhen's face flashed with a trace of panic. Could it be that the final stage of her heavenly tribulation had arrived? Yu Qianqiu stared at the sky. Suddenly, his heart felt as if everything in the world was waiting for something. Yu Qianqiu closed his eyes and faced the heaven and earth with his arms spread out. His divine sense expanded infinitely, gradually becoming one with the heaven and earth. Feeling the frequency of the heaven and earth, Yu Qianqiu's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. They are waiting for my call. Come. Yu Qianqiu gently smiled and spread out his arms. He raised his head and stuck out his chest, standing in the shape of the character. An unknown force slowly lifted him into the sky. Guan Yu, Chen Feng, and Bai Suzhen were dumbfounded, not knowing what he was going to do. After his body rose to a certain position in the sky, Yu Qianqiu fiercely opened his eyes. In an instant, the lightning in the clouds became more and more restless. The lightning flashed and the thunder roared. First, a bolt of lightning quickly struck towards him, followed by countless bolts of lightning rushing towards him. All the lightning was released from the clouds, and with him as the end point, it weaved into a huge ball of light. "Boss!" Chen Feng cried out in alarm. The three's faces turned pale. Being struck by so many lightning bolts, no one would be able to survive. How could this be? Bai Suzhen clenched her teeth and flew towards the ball of light in the sky. She wanted to save Yu Qianqiu, regardless of whether he was dead or alive. Just as Bai Suzhen was about to get close to the ball of lightning, a bolt of lightning as thick as a water tank struck directly at her from the clouds. Bai Suzhen was shocked. She used all her strength of transcending tribulation to send out a dazzling white light, which fiercely collided with the lightning bolt. Bang! The powerful shockwaves caused Guan Yu and Chen Feng to fall to the ground. The two of them sat on the ground with their mouths agape. To be able to fight against such a powerful sky lightning, that level of cultivation was simply too shocking. It was something that they did not even dare to imagine. The birds and beasts that were roaming around were running around in all directions. After the loud sound, Bai Suzhen raised her head and spat out a mouthful of blood. Her body was sent flying diagonally to one side. Before she fell, another lightning bolt, which was twice as thick as the previous one, chased after her. A trace of despair flashed across Bai Suzhen's face. That attack just now had exhausted all of her cultivation. She could no longer resist. "Stop!" A loud shout came from the sky. The lightning bolt that chased after her instantly disappeared without a trace. Bai Suzhen safely fell into the sea of flowers. Her hair was messy and her clothes were untidy. She slowly stood up and helplessly looked at the sky. "Sister, don't worry. I'm fine." Yu Qianqiu's comforting voice came from the sky. After he finished speaking, the lightning bolts in the sky gradually disappeared back into the clouds. The black clouds also stopped surging. The earth also became quiet. Yu Qianqiu stood in midair unscathed. He crossed his arms over his chest and suddenly shouted, "Open." He pushed his arms to the left and right, as if he was pushing away something extremely heavy. The earth trembled once again. The purple chaos that surrounded the sky and connected the earth quickly spread into the distance. The dark clouds in the sky churned again. They began to scatter from the center, chasing after the purple chaos in the distance. A piece of sky that was as blue velvet also spread out with the dark clouds. Suddenly, when the dark clouds retreated, they left behind a blazing sun in the blue sky, shining brightly on the earth. The clouds in the sky disappeared, and the earth was as calm as before. The sky that was originally hazy was replaced by a blue sky and a blazing sun. Yu Qianqiu was like a god who had created the world. He still stood in the sky, his clothes fluttering in the wind. Floating in the sky, he looked around. Utopia's territory had doubled in size again. Without a doubt, his cultivation level had increased again. He had finally broken through to the foundation establishment stage that he had been dreaming of. Yu Qianqiu could not help but laugh out loud in the sky. It had indeed calmed down. Guan Yu and Chen Feng got up and looked around, not knowing what to do. When they heard their boss' proud laughter, the two of them looked over at the same time. They turned their heads and looked at each other. F***CK. There was a strange cry in the sky. The two of them hurriedly looked over and saw Yu Qianqiu's limbs flapping as he turned into a black shadow and fell straight down. With a cry, he landed in the courtyard with his limbs facing the sky. Unreasonable. Yu Qianqiu lay on the ground and stared at the sky with his eyes wide open. He had been floating in the air with ease a moment ago. It was as if he could control the unknown power in the unseen world at will. The feeling of controlling the world was really good. Why did they suddenly lose contact with each other? It was as if everything that had happened just now was a dream, and the fall had woken him up. He moved his limbs that were about to fall apart and twisted his neck. Guan Yu and Chen Feng stood at the side and looked at him in bewilderment. Yu Qianqiu groaned. "What are you looking at? Quick, help me up. Damn it, I nearly fell to my death." The two of them helped him up hesitantly. How did their boss, who had been like a god just now, become like this in the blink of an eye? His clothes were tattered, and the black marks left on his body after he built his foundation establishment were gone. He was no different from a beggar. Ouch! Yu Qianqiu stood up and groaned. He looked around. The bamboo house had all collapsed, and the trees in the forest were all over the place. The entire sea of flowers had also been destroyed. All of this proved that what had happened earlier was real and not a dream. Thinking of this, Yu Qianqiu said anxiously, "Where's my sister? Quick, help me to my sister's place." Actually, when Bai Suzhen saw him falling from the sky, she had already rushed over. As soon as she arrived, she heard her brother asking for her anxiously. She couldn't help but have a gentle expression on her face. She said softly, "I'm here." Yu Qianqiu suddenly turned around. Bai Suzhen's beautiful hair was messy, and her clothes were untidy. Her pale face was barely able to hang a smile, and the trace of blood at the corner of her mouth was eye-catching. Since the first time Yu Qianqiu saw her, she had always been gentle and quiet. Her body was always clean and spotless. Her beautiful and dignified appearance was unique in the world. When had she ever looked so battered and exhausted? She was trying to save him with her life just now. It was all his fault for being careless. Yu Qianqiu felt a sharp pain in his heart. He was extremely regretful, and his eyes were slightly moist. He pushed away the two people who were supporting him, and before his body could recover, he staggered over and hugged Bai Suzhen tightly. He kept blaming himself, "It's all my fault. It's all my fault. I didn't pay attention just now, and that's why you got injured." Bai Suzhen's pale face had a layer of red. In more than 200 years, this was the first time she was hugged by a man, and it was a very tight hug. There were people watching from the side. She used a bit of strength to push Yu Qianqiu away. She shook her head and said, "I'm fine. It's just that I used up too much of my vitality, and I'm a little weak. Are you all right?" Yu Qianqiu also felt that he had unintentionally taken advantage of her. He scratched his head and said with a smile, "I'm fine, I'm fine. It's just that my body is a little numb from the fall, and I haven't recovered yet. I'll be fine in a while." As he said that, he even used his fist to hit his chest, indicating that he was fine. Bai Suzhen nodded and looked at him. She said softly, "Go wash up." After saying that, she found a clean corner in the courtyard and sat down cross-legged with her eyes closed. Knowing that she wanted to recover her lost vitality, Yu Qianqiu looked at his body and said to his two subordinates, "My limbs are still a little weak. I'll have to trouble the two of you to help me to wash up by the lake." The two nodded and supported him on his left and right. When they passed by the destroyed sea of flowers, Yu Qianqiu sighed, "I made a little too much of a commotion just now. The two of you should fix it up again when you have time. My sister likes flowers. Also, I'll leave the ruined bamboo house in your hands." It was rare for Guan Yu and Chen Feng to say in unison, "Yes." When they walked to the lake, they realized that their bodies seemed to have returned to normal. They tried to move around, and there was still a little discomfort, but there was no other reaction. Yu Qianqiu quickly took off his clothes and happily jumped into the lake. He was an expert swimmer in his previous life. At this moment, he was swimming freestyle, butterfly, breaststroke. All kinds of swimming styles that Guan Yu and Chen Feng had never seen before were displayed. Chen Feng couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. After today, his admiration for Boss skyrocketed. Chapter 84. After washing up, Yu Qianqiu took out a brand new Fuxian Island uniform from his storage bag and put it on. He sat down cross-legged to check the condition of his body. Guan Yu and Chen Feng didn't need to say anything. They consciously stood on his left and right sides to protect him. Although there was no danger here, they seemed to have the awareness of being subordinates. His body's toughness had greatly increased. The width and toughness of the veins in his body were also incomparable. It seemed that after successfully building his foundation, his body, the carrier, had a qualitative leap. The true qi in his dantian had automatically refined into white liquid true qi. It shouldn't be called true qi now, it should be called essence qi. Unfortunately, it was only a small ball, not enough to fill the gap between his dantian's teeth. Essence qi revolved, and his body was immediately filled with power. After a little experience, he realized that the difference between cultivation before and after building his foundation was like heaven and earth. No wonder every cultivator wanted to break through to the foundation building stage. Apart from the increase in cultivation, there was another more important reason, and that was the increase in lifespan. In this era, a normal person could live to 60 or 70 years old. If it was a qi refinement cultivator, it wouldn't be a problem to live to 100 years old. Once he broke through to the foundation building stage, his lifespan would increase by another 50 years. There were 4 stages: foundation building, core formation, nascent soul, and tribulation passing. Each stage was divided into early, middle, and last stages. Each stage meant 50 years of lifespan. If he could cultivate to the last stage of tribulation passing, his lifespan would increase by another 600 years. There was also the legendary soul formation stage. It was said that it was also divided into 3 stages. The first stage would increase his lifespan by 800 years, and the third stage would increase his lifespan by 2,400 years. After breaking through to become a god, his lifespan would be as long as heaven and earth, but this was all a legend. Yu Qianqiu thought about trying to see if there was a chance to live forever, but after thinking about it, he didn't think it was possible, although he had a bit of a dream. On the way back, Yu Qianqiu walked in front while Guan Yu and Chen Feng consciously followed behind. Yu Qianqiu smiled and didn't say anything. It was as if he had found the feeling of being a boss in his previous life. Yunchang, didn't you say that when you reach the foundation building stage, you can ride a sword? Did your father or grandfather teach you anything about this? Yu Qianqiu asked. Guan Yu shook his head and said, "No, my grandfather and father have always abided by the sect rules in supporting Immortal Island. They didn't impart anything to me without permission. After my grandfather passed away and my father's whereabouts were unknown, I didn't have the chance to learn from him." His tone was a little gloomy. Chen Feng looked at him in shock. It turned out that Guan Yu was from supporting Immortal Island. This was the first time he found out. Yu Qianqiu nodded his head and thought that there was a reason why Guan Yu was expelled from the supporting Immortal Island. There were many people with low aptitudes in every sect and sect. Who had ever heard of a grandfather who was an elder of a sect but his grandson couldn't even reach the foundation building realm and was expelled from the sect? Could it be that the supporting Immortal Island had given out so many foundation building pills every year? Was it so difficult for a dignified elder to get a few more building foundation dawn? This was probably related to his father and grandfather's pedantry. "Boss, you're already at the foundation building stage. You can openly go to the scripture depository to learn all kinds of spells. There's no lack of sword kinesis flight spells there," Guan Yu added. Scripture depository? Yu Qianqiu was a little gloomy. He knew that foundation building disciples could enter the scripture depository to learn spells, but didn't he want to hide it? Mulberry Garden's foundation building disciples would naturally be reported by Mulberry Garden to Wanfen Garden. Then, it would be passed on to the sect for confirmation before being recorded. Ma Jiugu and the others would inevitably ask after he succeeded in foundation building. How should he answer then? What was the point of not learning some defensive spells after succeeding in foundation building? Presumably, Guan Yu and Chen Feng were also looking forward to it. Yu Qianqiu thought for a while and said with a frown, "I'll think of a way to learn spells." In the collapsed bamboo courtyard, Bai Suzhen was still sitting cross-legged there. Yu Qianqiu didn't disturb her. He had already stayed here for 2 days, and staying too long wasn't a good idea. He turned around and looked at the mess he made and said to the two, "I'll leave this place to you. When I come next time, I'll ask my sister to return your natal primordial spirits." The two were very excited and said in unison, "Yes." Back in the hut, Furong was no longer on the bed. At this hour, she should be working in the spiritual grass field. His eyes suddenly brightened when he glanced at the bed. It was inconvenient for him to go to the scripture depository, but couldn't Farong, who was at the foundation building stage, go? Wouldn't it be the same to ask her to write it down and bring it to me? The most important thing was that this girl was obedient and trustworthy. She was really the best person to do this. It was reasonable to say that with Yan Zixia's cultivation level, she could also do it, but because she was from the 100 Flowers Valley, she rarely showed up in the mulberry garden. She definitely wouldn't go to a place as ostentatious as the scripture depository. Having made up his mind, he was in a good mood and leisurely walked to the spiritual grass field. There were a few familiar figures, but he didn't see Furong's shadow. Looking around, Yu Qianqiu frowned deeply. At the entrance of the mulberry garden, Furong was limping and carrying a load. She bit her lip and walked over with difficulty step by step. When Yu Qianqiu saw her, his first thought was that this girl was beaten by someone. It seemed that both her legs were injured. Otherwise, with her cultivation level at the late stage of foundation building, even if she could walk with one leg, carrying a load wouldn't be so difficult. Who was so wicked? Knowing that she had to carry a load and work every day, he actually hurt her legs. An indescribable anger ignited in Yu Qianqiu's chest. This girl was very timid. She never went to provoke people, and she never dared to provoke people. Who had such a big grudge against her that they actually wanted to mess with her like this? Yu Qianqiu took a deep breath and swallowed his anger. He hurriedly ran over and said, "Martial Uncle Furong, quickly give me the load." Who would have thought that when Furong saw him, it was as if she had seen a ghost. She was so scared that she retreated again and again. Unable to bear it, both of her legs were injured. She lost her balance and the load on her small shoulders fell down. The feces in the 2 buckets spilled all over the ground. She also fell on her butt and was covered in dirt. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. Then, ignoring the dirt on the ground, he walked over to help her up. With a heavy expression, he asked, "What happened to your leg?" Furong, who was helped up, pushed him away and said fearfully, "It's nothing. I accidentally fell when I was walking." Their movements immediately attracted other people's attention. Quite a few female disciples who were squatting in the spiritual herb field and working stood up and looked in their direction. Someone with a cultivation level in the late stage of the foundation building realm could fall while walking, and even injure both of her legs like this? Even a ghost wouldn't believe that. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly and said, "Who did it?" Furong begged, "I beg you, don't worry about me. I beg you, hurry up and leave." Seeing that she didn't answer, Yu Qianqiu immediately disregarded everything and forcibly carried her to the side. He lifted up her long skirt to examine the injuries on her legs. Furong struggled with all her might. This caused quite a few female disciples in the spiritual herb field to cry out in alarm. The result of his examination was that the bones in the same position on both legs were broken, and both legs were very swollen. Fortunately, Furong was a cultivator with a certain level of cultivation. If it was a normal person, let alone working, they wouldn't even be able to walk. Yu Qianqiu let go of her and angrily said, "Why didn't you apply medicine? Why didn't you treat your injuries? Both your legs were broken, so why did you still run out to work? Who in the world did it?" Furong stared behind him and shook her head repeatedly in fright. Yu Qianqiu turned his head to look behind him. Elder Lan expressionlessly walked over. Elder Lan swept a glance at the feces scattered all over the ground, then stared at Furong and said coldly, "What's going on here?" Furong was so scared that she was trembling. Yu Qianqiu knew she was most afraid of Elder Lan, so he immediately explained, "Disciple accidentally bumped into Martial Uncle, that's why I ended up like this. Elder Lan, please punish me." Chapter 85. Lan Bingxue was still staring at Furong and said coldly, "Really?" Furong looked panicked and didn't know what to do. Yu Qianqiu rushed to answer, "Yes, many of the disciples in the garden saw what happened just now. I hope Elder Lan won't blame Martial Uncle. I'll clean this place up later." Lan Bingxue looked at Yu Qianqiu and her cold expression softened a lot. She didn't say anything and turned around to walk into the inner garden. Wait, Lan Bingxue. I have a favor to ask. Yu Qianqiu shouted. What is it? Lan Bingxue turned around and asked. Yu Qianqiu bowed and said, Junior Master Furong's legs are injured. Both of her thighs are broken. I want some medicine. He knew that Lan Bingxue was the housekeeper of the garden. She was the most suitable person to ask. However, she shook her head and said, We don't have such medicine. No? How is that possible? Yu Qianqiu was startled. He let out a breath and said, Then this disciple will go ask Jiu Gu for a consecration. Maybe she has it. Lan Bingxue reached out a hand and blocked his way. She said slowly, I told you that we don't have this kind of medicine in Mulberry Garden. Don't tell me you don't believe me. A stream of cold air floated out of her hand. So cold. Yu Qianqiu didn't know what kind of martial arts this woman practiced. He couldn't help but shiver. He suspected that she was the one who broke Furong's legs. Otherwise, why would she be so cruel? No matter how low her cultivation was, they were still disciples of the same school. It was just a guess. He didn't have any evidence and Furong wouldn't say anything. It was not good to offend someone of this level. He took a step away from the freezing cold and politely bowed, Thank you for your guidance, Elder Lan. This disciple understands. Lan Bingxue glanced at the two of them and went back to the inner garden. Let's go. I will take you to a place to heal. Yu Qianqiu gritted his teeth and said to Furong. There were not many people he was familiar with and could help him in the 10,000 fragrance garden. He thought of Elder Ferdinand who was in charge of the 10,000 fragrance garden. Furong shook her head and begged, Please don't care about me, okay? Just move to the inner garden. At this point, she bit her lip and stopped, as if she had said something she shouldn't. Yu Qianqiu said cautiously, What does this have to do with me moving to the inner garden? Could it be that your leg was injured because I refused to move to the inner garden? Furong frantically waved her hands and said, No, it really isn't. Her abnormal behavior aroused Yu Qianqiu's suspicion even more, reminding him of a certain matter. Some time ago, Yan Zixia had asked him several times to move into the inner garden, but he had always refused. He knew that Yan Zixia liked him, and had asked him to live in the inner garden so that they could meet at any time. However, because he was worried that it would be inconvenient to live in the inner garden, and he was afraid that others would discover his secret, and Furong's mouth was very reliable. She could keep the secret that he often disappeared for no reason, so he rejected Yan Zixia and would rather live with Furong in a small nest. Could it be that because he and Furong refused to separate from each other, it aroused Yan Zixia's jealousy and caused trouble for Furong? This woman was a very jealous animal. The more Yu Qianqiu thought about it, the more he felt it was possible. He probed, Your leg was injured by Yan Zixia? Furong really didn't want to stand here and be entangled with him endlessly. She cried, No. After saying this, she endured the pain in her leg and went to pick up the overturned bucket. Did you ruin your face, and now you want to cripple your legs? Yu Qianqiu shouted. He kicked away the bucket she wanted to pick up, picked her up by the waist, and ran outside. Furong kept struggling and even used her fists. However, perhaps she was really too kind and didn't seem to know how to refuse others, or how to hit people. The strength of her fists hitting Yu Qianqiu's body was directly ignored by him. Yu Qianqiu shook his head and smiled bitterly at the thought of wasting his late-stage foundation establishment realm cultivation. He didn't think he was a good person, and he didn't have the obligation to save the dying and help the injured. However, as a man, there were some things he should do and some things he shouldn't, not to mention that she might have been implicated by him. He would just treat it as doing a good deed and helping the weak. A man carrying a woman running in broad daylight had never appeared in Wanfen Garden before, so it attracted a lot of people's attention. As soon as they ran to the entrance of Wanfen Garden's main hall, they were naturally stopped by the guards. Let go of me. Furong was still struggling, and Yu Qianqiu also became a little angry. With a "pa" sound, he slapped Furong's wriggling butt. The person on his shoulder immediately quieted down, and the two female disciples guarding the entrance were also a little dumbfounded. Yu Qianshou said while carrying Furong. Disciple Yu Qianshou is here to see Elder Fei. The female guard saw the two of them rushing in with dirty clothes. She originally wanted to question them, but at this time, she was also stunned and said, "Wait." She went in to report. Not long after, she came out and told him that Elder Fei let him in. After carrying Furong in, he saw Ferdinand standing in the main hall of the main hall. "Yu Qianshou, what are you doing?" Ferdinand saw him carrying a person and asked curiously. Because of what happened in the past, Yu Qianshou didn't have a good impression of him, so he didn't bother to be polite with him. He put Furong down and helped her to sit on a chair. Then he saluted and said, "I don't know who broke Martial Aunt Furong's leg. Please treat her injury, Elder Fei." However, he saw him staring at Furong in a daze. The latter was timid and didn't dare to raise her head under his gaze. Yu Qianshou looked at both sides. Could it be that Ferdinand had a special hobby of liking ugly girls? No wonder Lan Bingxue was so beautiful but lived apart from him for a long time. Thinking about it made him shudder. He hurriedly saluted again and said, "Please treat Martial Aunt Furong's injury, Elder Fei." "Ah." Ferdinand came back to his senses and said anxiously, "Furong is injured." "Where is the injury?" "Both of her thigh bones were broken." "What?" Ferdinand screamed and took a few steps forward. Just as he was about to reach out and lift up the long skirt covering Furong's legs, the latter subconsciously covered it with her hands. Ferdinand's hand paused. Then he remembered that the other party was a woman, and it was a bit indecent to do so. He squatted down on the ground and put his hands directly on Furong's knees. He transferred his qi from his palms into the other party's leg to check the injury. After a while, Ferdinand's face became livid. He slowly stood up and suddenly slammed his palm on the tea table. Bang! The tea table was smashed into pieces. Furong was so scared that she shrank in the chair. Ferdinand's eyes were red, and his chest was heaving. He stared at Yu Qianshou and shouted, "Who did it? Damn it! Why are you getting angry at me? I didn't do it." Yu Qianshou smiled bitterly and said, "I don't know either." Ferdinand stared at Furong again, and his expression became very kind. He said, "Tell me who did it." Furong stammered, No, I fell myself." Her words could not deceive Yu Qianshou, nor could it deceive Ferdinand. The latter gritted his teeth and said, "Was it Lan Bingxue who did it?" Furong shook her head in fear. Yu Qianshou was very surprised. Looking at Ferdinand's expression, it was clear that Elder Lan was the one who did it. What was even more strange was why he was so concerned about Furong. "Elder Ferdinand, she is timid. Why don't you heal her first? If you have any questions, ask later," Yu Qianshou said. Unexpectedly, Ferdinand pointed at him and scolded, "I don't need you to be a good person. Why did I bring you to the mulberry garden? I just wanted you to take care of her. How come you don't know who did it when she was injured like this? Trash." Yu Qianshou pointed at himself. He opened his mouth and was speechless. His mind was in a mess. Chapter 86. Humph. Fernand took out a piece of jade from his storage pouch, made a few finger seals, and said to the jade, "Junior Martial Sister Chiu, I'm Fernand, please come here quickly." Finished speaking, he crushed it in his hand. Then, he took out a jade stone and cast the same spell. He shouted, "Lan Bingxue, come here." He crushed the jade stone. After doing this, Ferdinand angrily paced back and forth in the lobby. Yu Qianshou also came to his senses. He finally understood why Ferdinand wanted him to grow spirit herbs in the mulberry garden. It was to take care of Hibiscus. Who was this ugly girl? He looked at Hibiscus, who was in a panic speechlessly. She was probably afraid when she heard that Elder Lan was coming. Not long after, a disciple's voice came from outside the hall, "Elder Chiu." A graceful woman led a delicate and pretty young girl in. Yu Qianqiu had seen this woman before and knew that she was Elder Qiu, who was in charge of healing supporting Immortal Island's disciples. However, he had never seen the young girl behind her. Yu Qianqiu bowed. Disciple Yu Qianqiu greets Elder Qiu. Hibiscus also wanted to stand up and bow, but Elder Fei pressed her shoulder. You shouldn't stand. Elder Qiu won't blame you. She then turned her head and said, Junior sister, come and take a look at her. Her leg bones are broken and there should be some other injuries. I can't do it. You are an expert, so I had to invite you. Elder Qiu nodded. Senior brother, you don't have to be so polite with me. He walked to Hibiscus and was slightly startled when he saw her face. He asked Ferdinand, Is it Hibiscus? The latter nodded sadly. Damn! Who was this girl? How could a big shot know her? Yu Qianqiu had to re-examine this ugly girl. Elder Jiu Gu, Elder Lan. The disciple's voice came from outside. Lan Bingxue, who was sneering, walked in with Ma Jiu Gu. Elder Jiu Gu. Ferdinand and Elder Qiu bowed. Consecrated Jiu Gu, Elder Lan. Yu Qianqiu and the pretty girl greeted. Hibiscus, who was about to bow, was once again pressed down on her shoulder by Ferdinand. Lan Bingxue sneered, Ferdinand, why did you call me here? Ferdinand's face was full of anger. He pointed at Hibiscus and shouted at her, Did you break her legs? Lan Bingxue glanced at Hibiscus and said, Did she tell you herself? I'm asking you, did you interrupt? Ferdinand shouted again. So what if I am? Do you feel sorry for her? Lan Bingxue scornfully said, I should have killed her and that little bitch together. All right. What did you promise me back then? Ferdinand's chest heaved up and down rapidly. He said angrily, You promised Jiu Gu and me that you wouldn't hurt her as long as I don't see her again. I've always kept my promise. What did you do? There's an affair, there's definitely an affair. Yu Qianqiu looked at Ferdinand, and then at Lan Bingxue. Ma Jiu Gu heavily poked the hall with her walking stick. Suddenly, the hall became silent. Only Ferdinand's rapid breathing could be heard. She walked to Hibiscus with her walking stick and casually touched Hibiscus's legs. Her half-drooping eyelids suddenly opened. She stared at Lan Bingxue and said in a deep voice, Lan girl, what's going on? Lan Bingxue's face flashed with a trace of panic. She hurriedly walked over, made a finger gesture, and whispered in Ma Jiugu's ear. She pointed at Yu Qianqiu from time to time. Yu Qianqiu knew that she was using a kind of sound transmission spell. No one could hear it except for the designated person. But why did she keep pointing at him? He was depressed. Now, everyone was staring at him, and Ferdinand was staring at him with bloodshot eyes, as if he was going to eat him. After listening to Lan Bingxue's explanation, Ma Jiugu's eyelids returned to normal. She shook her head and said, Lan girl. I have my own plan. Why do I need you to intervene? Since you have broken the original promise, Ferdinand has the right to reunite with his daughter. Don't have any ideas about her in the future. Otherwise, I won't spare you. Daughter? Is she talking about Hibiscus? Yu Qianqiu had a rough idea of what was going on. He guessed that Furong was the daughter of Ferdinand after he had an affair with a woman. In the end, his wife found out and killed his lover. After that, the two of them made an agreement, and Lan Bingxue took his daughter away. But what does this have to do with me? Why is Samba pointing at me? The anger on Ferdinand's face instantly turned into surprise. It seemed that he couldn't believe it was true. Lan Bingxue's face changed color. She stared at Hibiscus while trembling all over. A faint white mist was emitted from her body. The temperature of the whole hall immediately dropped. What? Lan girl, don't you agree? Ma Jiugu poked Lan Bingxue with her walking stick. Lan Bingxue shook her head and said, I don't dare. Her eyes were full of resentment as she stared at Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu was alarmed. He knew that it was him who ruined her plan. Now, he had accidentally made another strong enemy. Well, Hibiscus doesn't need to return to Mulberry Garden anymore. Ferdinand doesn't need to pursue the matter of lawn girl hurting others. From today onwards, the two of you will treat it as if it never happened. Don't make trouble anymore. Ma Jiaogu turned her head and said, Ferdinand, you are in charge of Wanfen Garden. Can you agree if I make the decision? Ferdinand was pleasantly surprised and said, everything is up to Jiaogu. Ferdinand thanks Jiaogu. He was naturally happy to get his daughter back. Hibiscus was timid, but she was not stupid. At this time, her eyes were filled with tears and she bit her lips. Yu Qianqiu was thinking about how to get along with Lan Bingxue in the future. Suddenly, Ma Jiaogu's voice came to his ears. Yu Qianqiu, I heard that you refined a lot of foundation building pills. You must have succeeded in building your foundation, right? Yu Qianqiu's face sank. He looked at her and heard her say, don't worry about others hearing me. I use divine sense to transmit my voice. Only you can hear it. Don't worry about others. It seemed that what he said to Yan Zixia didn't work. She still told Ma Jiao about it. This woman. A trace of disgust flashed in his heart. Yu Qianqiu nodded unhappily and admitted that he had succeeded in building his foundation. Ma Jiaogu said to him, then this old woman congratulates you. If someone asks about you in the future, you can tell them that this old woman gave you foundation building pills. Yu Qianqiu nodded again. He knew that this was a gesture of goodwill and helped him avoid a lot of trouble. It was reasonable to say that this was what he wanted, so he should be happy. But when he thought that it was his woman who leaked the secret, he couldn't be happy. Dinan, Yu Qianqiu has succeeded in building his foundation. Tell him. Ma Jiaogu suddenly said. What? He succeeded in building his foundation? I got it. Fernan was a bit surprised. But since Ma Jiaogu said so, it shouldn't be a lie. Moreover, he knew what he should not ask. In the hall, apart from Elder Qiu, the young girl, and Furong, Lan Bingxue also looked at Yu Qianqiu with a bit of surprise. She didn't know when he succeeded in building his foundation. She was doing a good deed to the end, helping the Buddha to the west. Why did she do me such a big favor? Yu Qianqiu sighed. He was a bit creeped out thinking that a person with such a high cultivation was scheming against him. Your daughter has returned to your side. What are you going to do with Yu Qianqiu? Ma Jiaogu asked. Ferdinand muttered, I borrowed him from Elder Guan. I promised to return him to him. If Ninth Aunt has any use for him, of course, he will continue to stay in the Mulberry Garden. I don't think Elder Guan will have any objection. Ma Jiaogu shook her head and said, isn't that forcing him? I think Yu Qianqiu should make the decision himself. If he wants to go back to Alchemy Pavilion, he can go back. If he wants to stay in Mulberry Garden, I will talk to Wei Wu and ask him to give this disciple to Mulberry Garden. Elder Qiu and the young girl looked at Yu Qianqiu together. They didn't know why Ma Jiaogu thought so highly of him. Just do as Jiaogu said. Fernan nodded and said to Yu Qianqiu, do you want to stay in Mulberry Garden or go back to Alchemy Pavilion? Yu Qianqiu finally understood the reason why Ma Jiaogu showed goodwill to him. It turned out that she wanted him to stay in Mulberry Garden. What was on him that she wanted? After a moment of silence, he slowly said, a master for a day is a master for life. I want to go back to master. Chapter 87. Ma Jiaogu slowly closed her eyes. Everyone could understand the meaning behind her words. She said this because she wanted Yu Qianqiu to stay, but the latter didn't give her any face. Everyone was shocked. The girl who came with Elder Qiu couldn't help but look at Yu Qianqiu. Ferdinand's expression changed. He said in a low voice, Yu Qianqiu, do you want to reconsider? It's your good fortune to have Jiaogu ask. Under everyone's gazes, Yu Qianqiu remained silent. There was no need to say anything, and this already represented his attitude. Lan Bingxue shouted, Yu Qianqiu, do you really think you are somebody? Don't be so ungrateful. Yu Qianqiu shook his head. Yu Qianqiu, am not somebody, but if master doesn't give up, I won't dare to turn my back on him. Everyone was moved by his words. The young girl by Elder Chiu's side looked at him with an even brighter gaze. You. Lan Bingxue said angrily, you're courting death. She took a step forward and was about to attack. Lan girl. Ma Jiugu waved her hand to stop her. She opened her eyes to look at Yu Qianqiu and said, Wei Wu has been muddle-headed all day long. I didn't expect that he would be so lucky to have accepted a good disciple. Speaking of which, he is my grandnephew. I should be happy for him. Most of the people in the cultivation world were people who wouldn't get up early if there were no benefits. If an expert like Ma Jiugu were to take a liking to someone like Ma Jiugu, then they would be extremely happy. Not to mention how many benefits they could get. Just the fact that an expert at the late stage of the crossing tribulation stage was standing behind them meant that no matter how strong the cultivation world was, they would have to think twice before making a move on him. Therefore, Ma Jiugu's words of praise were indeed sincere. Thank you, Elder Jiugu. Yu Qianqiu said respectfully. In fact, he didn't think so much, and he wasn't as great as he said. He was just a little disappointed in Yan Zixia. So disappointed that he didn't want to go back to the mulberry garden. He could let anyone else down, but he couldn't accept the betrayal of his own people. Before this, he was confident that Yan Zixia could become his woman. Ma Jiugu nodded and said to Lan Bingxue, let's go back. When passing by Yu Qianqiu, she said to him, don't forget that you still owe me a favor. Yu Qianqiu bowed, this disciple dares not forget. That's good, Ma Jiugu said and left the hall with Lan Bingxue. Before he left, he cast a cold glance at Yu Qianqiu. As soon as they left, everyone's attention in the main hall shifted to Furong, but they saw that she was silent and crying non-stop. Ferdinand's eyes were red as he heaved a long sigh and said to Elder Chiu, please, junior sister. Because she was a woman, it was inconvenient for her to recuperate in the main hall, so Ferdinand ordered someone to clean up a room. Seeing that the people who helped her into the room were all strangers, Furong couldn't help but panic. She suddenly turned around and shouted into the main hall, Yu Qianqiu. She didn't speak, but this naturally attracted everyone's attention, especially the person she called. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. This was the first time Furong called him. He scratched his head and said, Senior. Senior sister, what's the matter? He was used to calling her martial uncle, so he almost couldn't change it. He remembered that he was also a foundation-building cultivator, so he should call her senior sister. Furong was also not used to it, so she said awkwardly, are you leaving? Oh. I'm going back to Alchemy Pavilion to see my master. With Elder Fei taking care of you, senior sister, you can recuperate in peace. Yu Qianqiu realized. Furong gritted her teeth and said, Will you come back? This ugly girl was very timid. She was probably a little afraid of being alone here. Yu Qianqiu comforted, senior sister, don't worry. I'll definitely come to see you often when I'm free. Ferdinand looked at the two thoughtfully. Seeing that Furong didn't speak, he ordered someone to help her in. There were only 2 men left in the main hall, and it was not convenient for them to follow in. Yu Qianqiu, when do you want to return to Alchemy Pavilion? Ferdinand asked, his eyes looking up and down. Yu Qianqiu scratched his head and said, I have to go back sooner or later. It's better to go back early than late. I'll go back now. Ferdinand nodded and said, I'll send you back. Yu Qianqiu hurriedly waved his hand and said, no need, no need. How can I trouble Elder? Disciple knows the way back. It has nothing to do with you. I borrowed people from Alchemy Pavilion. I have to give Elder Guan an explanation. Ferdinand said. But senior sister Furong, Ferdinand waved his hand and said, she won't recover for a while. It's enough for her to go back and forth to Alchemy Pavilion. After that, he summoned another disciple and told him to listen to Elder Chiu's arrangement. The 2 of them left the main hall. Yu Qianqiu thought that he was going to grab him and fly away again. Who knew that Ferdinand would walk, so he had to follow. Along the way, Ferdinand constantly looked at Yu Qianqiu with strange eyes. The latter didn't know what he was doing, so he simply pretended not to see it. Otherwise, he would panic in his heart. Not long after, Ferdinand finally asked, "I heard that you've been sleeping in the same room with Furong in the mulberry garden?" Yu Qianqiu was stunned and hurriedly explained, No, we were in the same room, but not on the same bed." "Elder Fei, don't misunderstand." Ferdinand nodded noncommittally and sighed, "Furong's mother died early, and I didn't fulfill my responsibility as a father. I'm sorry for her." "Yu Qianqiu, can I ask you something? I'm tired of listening to this. Damn it. It's none of my business that you didn't fulfill your responsibility as a father." Yu Qianqiu thought so in his heart, but he respectfully said, "Elder Fei, you must be joking. As long as this disciple can do it, I won't hesitate. I can see that she is close to you. After you go back to the alchemy pavilion, I hope that you can come and see her often when you have time." Ferdinand, the dignified Wanfen Garden's chief elder, looked at him with a pleading look. "This is no problem, I'm afraid." Yu Qianqiu frowned and said, "I'm afraid that after I go back, I won't be able to control myself. I don't know if I will have time." "You don't have to worry about this. I will find Guan Weiwu to arrange a good position for you. If he dares to disagree, the spirit herbs of Wanfen Garden are not so easy to get." Speaking of this, Ferdinand's eyes actually showed a trace of fierce light. As if whoever dared to block his daughter's happiness, he would bite that person to death. Love for a child. Yu Qianqiu smiled. He wanted to ask about Furong's life experience and what was the matter with the injury on her face, but after thinking about it, it was better not to ask. The distance from Wanfen Garden to the alchemy pavilion was not far, but it was not close either. It would take a lot of time to walk dozens of miles. In the end, Ferdinand, who was used to flying, could not stand it anymore. He grabbed Yu Qianqiu and flew away, landing on the top of the alchemy pavilion in a few moments. Unfortunately, Yu Qianqiu saw his old enemy, Yan Shu, at a glance. He was puzzled. What was this guy doing here all day long? Why did he bump into him as soon as he arrived? What bad luck. When enemies met, they looked at each other coldly. After the two of them met face to face, Yan Shu saluted Ferdinand and said, "Elder Fei." Yan family's boy, where is Guan Weiwu?" Ferdinand asked. Yan Shu replied, "Elder Guan is inside." "Oh, I have something to discuss with him." Ferdinand strode into the alchemy pavilion and shouted, "Guan Weiwu, where are you hiding?" Chapter 88. The remaining two did not speak. Yan Shu stared coldly at Yu Qianqiu unscrupulously, while the latter looked around and pretended not to see him. After waiting for a while and not seeing Ferdinand come out, Yan Shu's face became uglier and uglier. The other party clearly did not put him in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Yan Shu finally could not hold it in and asked with a gloomy face. Yu Qianqiu looked around and pointed to himself and asked curiously, "Are you talking to me?" This made Yan Shu so angry that his face was distorted and he said sternly, "Do the rules of Fuxian Island allow you to talk to your senior like this?" Yu Qianqiu seemed to have come to his senses and bowed solemnly. "Disciple Yu Qianqiu greets Uncle Master." "Uncle Master?" Yan Shu did not know that he had successfully built his foundation and was now in the foundation building stage. In addition, Yu Qianqiu's situation was special, so it was difficult for outsiders to see the depth of his cultivation. Instead, they thought that he deliberately called him a generation lower. Yan Shu's hatred for Yu Qianqiu was not ordinary. As the saying goes, if you hit someone, don't hit his face. Yu Qianqiu had reprimanded him in front of everyone in the alchemy pavilion, causing him to lose face in the alchemy pavilion. Until now, there were still disciples who mocked him behind his back. If he did not find a reason to take revenge, how could he swallow it? For a moment, he could not find any other reason, so he could only use it as a pretext and shouted angrily, "How dare you? You have no respect for your elders. Do you still have Fuxian Island's rules in your eyes?" Yu Qianqiu sneered, "Strange. Why don't I have Fuxian Island's rules in my eyes? Uncle Master Yen, tell me. What's going on? It was Guan Weiwu's voice. He and Ferdinand walked out of the Alchemy Pavilion's hall together. Master. Yu Qianqiu bowed and looked at Guan Weiwu affectionately. Now was the time to argue, and he needed his master's support. Guan Weiwu also looked at Yu Qianqiu affectionately and said with a smile, "It's good that you're back. I heard you succeeded in building your foundation. Congratulations." Just now, Ferdinand had already told him about Yu Qianqiu's success in building his foundation, as well as how Yu Qianqiu rejected Ma Jiugu and how Ma Jiugu praised him for having a good disciple. This pill addict was deeply moved and repeatedly said that he did not accept this disciple in vain. At this moment, no matter how she looked at Yu Qianqiu, she found him pleasing to the eye. Yu Qianqiu bowed and said, "Without master's teachings, without consecrator Jiugu's nurturing, I wouldn't be who I am today." Guan Weiwu smiled awkwardly. He couldn't remember when he had taught this disciple, but when the disciple said this, the master also felt proud. In order to cover up the embarrassment, he turned to Yen Shu and said with a serious face, "I heard you shouting in the hall just now. What's going on?" Yen Shu originally wanted to exaggerate the small problem. He also knew that he couldn't do anything to Yu Qianqiu. He just wanted to disgust Yu Qianqiu. When he heard Guan Weiwu say that Yu Qianqiu had succeeded in building his foundation, he really couldn't find fault with him calling him Uncle Master. While he was in a daze, he heard the question and came back to his senses. He gritted his teeth and said, "It's nothing." Guan Weiwu wasn't a meticulous person. When he heard that it was nothing, he couldn't be bothered to ask more. He pointed at Yu Qianqiu and said, "Yen Shu, in the future, Yu Qianqiu will only be responsible for collecting spiritual herbs from Wanfen Garden. You don't need to arrange anything else. Also." After he pondered for a while, he added, "Yu Qianqiu can enter the main hall to find me at any time. No one is to stop him." It was unknown whether this was a great love for his disciple. Once a disciple of supporting Immortal Island reached the foundation building stage, they would have a fixed position. However, the division of labor was different. After all, there were still people to do the sex matters. However, it was much better than having people to look after chi refining disciples. Moreover, Yu Qianqiu's position could be said to be quite easy. Every day, he only needed to spend some time to go to Wanfen Garden to collect the spiritual herbs that the Alchemy Pavilion needed. Yen Shu replied with difficulty, "Yes." Yu Qianqiu guessed that it was also a good job. He glanced at Ferdinand. He reckoned that it was fought for by him. The reason was naturally to let him go to Wanfen Garden more often. After some things were explained clearly, Ferdinand's heart was filled with his daughter's injury and didn't stay for long. Guan Weiwu also went to do his own things. Yen Shu could be considered as the housekeeper of the Alchemy Pavilion, so the task of assigning Yu Qianqiu a place to stay fell on his shoulders. His desire for revenge was obvious, so Yu Qianqiu was thrown into the small, secluded courtyard that he had stayed in when he first arrived. It was reasonable to say that a disciple in the foundation building stage had the right to live in a place with better conditions. For Yu Qianqiu, there was no need to pick a residence. Moreover, the conditions here were much better than in the mulberry garden. He was also too lazy to make trouble with Yen Shu over such a small matter. The green mountains did not change, and the clear water would always flow. There would always be a time for revenge. There was no need to be calculative. The small courtyard was still the same. There was no change. He just didn't know if the people in the courtyard were still the same. Looking at the sky, all the disciples should have returned. He stood in the garden and deliberately coughed twice. Sure enough, hearing the movement in the courtyard, 3 doors opened. Looking at the 3 familiar faces in front of him who were a little surprised, Yu Qianqiu smiled slightly and said, "3 brothers, long time no see. I'm back." Ling Feng, Beizi, and Xian Ping looked at each other and showed a trace of embarrassment. In the beginning, the 3 of them thought that Yu Qianqiu was a braggart. They couldn't stand him and satirized him. Later, They saw him scold Yan Shu in public and did things that the three of them didn't dare to do. They knew that they had misunderstood him. After that, the three of them regretted it. Unfortunately, they didn't even have a chance to apologize. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, "Why? Don't you recognize me?" Ling Feng smiled bitterly and said, "How can we not recognize you? It's just that the three of us misunderstood Brother Yu that day. We are really ashamed." After one of them spoke, the other two also came over to apologize. Especially the silent Xian Ping. He was the one who said the worst things that day. Now, he said a bunch of apologies. There was no need for Yu Qianqiu to care about the past. The four of them called each other brothers. Without wine to liven things up, they naturally wouldn't be happy. Unfortunately, Xian Ping didn't have his personal stash. After all, their activity was limited, so it wasn't easy to get some wine. However, Yu Qianqiu took out 2 big jars from his storage bag. The four of them sat around the stone table and drank to their heart's content. After a few bowls of wine, Yu Qianqiu checked their cultivation. He found that they were still qi refining level 10. He asked curiously, "Could it be that you guys didn't get any foundation building pills this time?" The three of them smiled bitterly and complained. They got the foundation building pills, but probably because their talent was too poor, none of them actually succeeded. What was even more tragic was that this was the second time they failed. If they failed again 3 years later, they would probably have to say goodbye to Fuxian Island forever. From then on, they would have to cut off their dreams of cultivation and return to the mortal world. Seeing the three of them swallow the bitterness in their mouths, Yu Qianqiu knew that the three of them had tried to build their foundation twice. As for whether they could succeed the third time or not, they probably already knew. When he succeeded in building his foundation, he took 12 foundation building pills in a row. He was well aware of how much his body would change after taking one foundation building pill. Looking at the three of them dispirited, Yu Qianqiu had the urge to take out the foundation building pills to help them for free. He had plenty of foundation building pills anyway. However, he restrained himself. What good would it do him to help them now? Maybe in 3 years, when the three of them have their last hope shattered, he could help them without hesitation. At least now was not the time to help them. Their friendship over a glass of wine was very shallow. They hadn't known each other for a long time, so they still needed to understand each other better. In his previous life, there was a saying, "There is no free lunch in this world." Yu Qianqiu deeply agreed with it. In life, one must give something in order to get something in return. He helped the three of them succeed in building their foundation. How are the three of them going to repay him? Let's not talk about us. How did Brother Yu do in building his foundation this time? Ling Feng asked, but in his heart, he was already sure that Yu Qianqiu's result was about the same as the three of them. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come back to this small courtyard. Bei Zi and Xian Ping also had the same thought. Chapter 89. Yu Qianqiu could more or less guess what they were thinking. He downed a bowl of wine and placed it on the table lightly. He said indifferently, "My luck was better than yours. I succeeded in building my foundation." The three of them froze. After a while, Ling Feng asked in disbelief, "Brother Yu, did you say you succeeded in building your foundation?" "I was just lucky." Yu Qianqiu nodded. Bei Zi put down the wine bowl in her hand and looked at him again. She couldn't see any difference from before. She couldn't help but ask, "You're already in the foundation building stage. Why are you living here?" The three of them looked at him and waited for him to explain. "Of course it has something to do with Yan Shu." Yu Qianqiu smiled. "Actually, there's nothing wrong with living here. I have to thank Yan Shu for letting me reunite with my 3 brothers." After their doubts were cleared, the three of them looked at each other and stood up. They bowed together. "Martial Uncle Yu." Yu Qianqiu put on a shocked expression. He waited for the three of them to bow before standing up and stopping them. "What are the three of you doing?" Ling Feng shook his head and smiled bitterly. This is the sex rule. Sigh. Since that's the case, we'll follow the rules in front of others. Let's call each other brothers when we're together. Yu Qianqiu pretended to sigh. Since he said that, the other three also nodded in agreement. It wasn't that Yu Qianqiu was greedy for this little bit of glory. It was because his mentality had changed greatly after building his foundation. He had to walk step by step. Going to Anquangsung to fetch Chu Ping, was his goal. At least, it was his current goal. The cultivation world was different from other places. Everything depended on one's strength. In the past, working hard to build his foundation was the first step. After building his foundation, he had to work hard for the second step, which was to increase his strength. He had to be strong enough to go to Anquangsung to fetch Chu Ping, But how long would it take for a person to have the strength to receive Chu Ping, What level of cultivation did one have to reach? The scene of the battle between the Phantom Palace and Anquangsung in the Spirit Stone Mine was still vivid in their minds. At that time, they were amazed by the strength of the Phantom Palace, but then Anquangsung showed his strength and destroyed the Phantom Palace in one fell swoop. How terrifying was that strength? Wanting to rely on his own strength to pick up Chu Ping, was tantamount to a fool's talk. He was afraid that before he could break into Anquangsung, his bones would not be left. Unless his cultivation could really reach the legendary deity stage, was that even possible? There was one more thing, the death of Master Hao Sansi. It was a pain that was deeply hidden in his heart. There was a grudge that could not be avenged. Who could understand this hatred? Who should he complain to? He had sworn that he would annihilate the exalted immortal sect. It was not a joke, it was the biggest motivation that spurred him forward. But the exalted immortal sect was much stronger than Anquangsung. How could he deal with this kind of strength with a little bit of cleverness? In addition to improving his own cultivation, he had to build a group of forces that belonged to him, a group that could compete with the strength of a sect. This was not a daydream. It was the conclusion that Yu Qianqiu came to after careful consideration. The golden bead in his hand was the lever that could pry open all of this. Guan Yu, Chen Feng, and Shi Shaotian were the first batch of forces that belonged to him. Although they were still very immature, he believed that they would mature one day. This matter could not be rushed, and it could not be accomplished overnight. Then, Ling Feng, Beizi, Xian Ping, and everyone else in the cultivation world like you, I can give you the hope you need, but you must also pay for my hope. Yu Qianqiu pretended to accept their salute unintentionally so that the three of them would first have the awareness that he was a level higher than them. This was the awareness of subordinates, and it was also the awareness that a leader must have. The awareness that a leader was a level higher than the one being led. The cultivation pavilion was the most valiant place in Fuxian Island. Its territory alone occupied half of the island's area. There were many experts in it, and it was well known in the cultivation world. It was the foundation of Fuxian Island standing in the cultivation world. Just the number of tribulation passing elders had always been maintained at more than 80, and there were also countless other experts. For thousands of years, whenever the cultivation world was in chaos or Fuxian Island faced a crisis, the cultivation pavilion would strike like a thunderbolt and turn the tide. It had always maintained the reputation of Fuxian Island as the #1 righteous sect. Not to mention its other achievements, just talking about the last war between the righteous and the devil 400 years ago. Although the supporting Immortal Island was the #1 righteous sect, it was also isolated from the rest of the world. It would not easily get involved in any battles. However, the demonic sects were rampant, and the entire righteous sect was in a precarious situation. In desperation, the 36 sects that were ranked at the top of the righteous sects jointly begged the supporting Immortal Island to save the situation. In response to the request, Fuxian Island's cultivation pavilion sent 80 tribulation-passing elders and 3,000 nascent soul cultivators to attack decisively. They turned the situation around in one fell swoop, and finally, they had a peak battle with the #1 demonic sect, the 10,000 demons. At the cost of more than 60 tribulation-passing elders and 2,000 nascent soul cultivators, they repelled the 10,000 demons. The tragic degree of that battle was unbearable for those who were still alive today. Since then, the vitality of the entire cultivation world was greatly damaged, and there was more than 400 years of peace between the righteous and the devil sections. And because of that battle, no one dared to challenge the prestige of Fuxian Island's cultivation pavilion. The matter of Yu Qianqiu breaking through to the foundation establishment stage had already been reported to the sect. The next day, he received a registration notice, so he went to the Penglai Pavilion alone to register. As a result, he was asked to go to the Cultivation Pavilion to verify his name, and then return to the Penglai Pavilion to report. After that, he was officially recognized as a Foundation Establishment Stage disciple of Fuxian Island. Yu Qianqiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Not only did this Penglai Pavilion look like a government office building in his previous life, but even the procedures were so similar. Yu Qianqiu had naturally heard of the Cultivation Pavilion. In his words, the status of the Cultivation Pavilion in Fuxian Island was like the Arhat Hall of the Shaolin Temple in his previous life. When there was a problem that needed to be solved by force, the martial monks of the Arhat Hall would come out to fight. Usually, if you stood at the highest point of the Alchemy Pavilion and looked east, you would find that most of the Fuxian Island in the east was shrouded in clouds, making it hard to see through. That was the location of the Cultivation Pavilion. The place was too big, so Yu Qianqiu didn't feel ashamed to ask a few people along the way. Only after asking did he find the right way to enter. There was a valley in the middle of the two mountains. At the entrance of the valley stood a large memorial arch looking at the three big words, Cultivation Pavilion, on the memorial arch in front of him. He really felt pressured. There was no other way. Who told him to succeed late and not make it in time, so he could only come alone? Under the memorial arch stood two disciples with swords on their backs. When they saw him come alone, they stared at him coldly. Yu Qianqiu smiled and walked in front of one of them. He took out a letter of introduction and a jade disc and handed it over respectfully. Foundation Establishment Stage Disciple Yu Qianqiu, here to verify my name. The person looked at him suspiciously, took the jade disc, and checked it with his divine sense. After confirming it, he said, "Follow me. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."